The slap stung against my cheek like a whip crack. My head snapped to the side. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I didn't cry. I learned a long time ago that tears only make Brenda hit harder. "Put the damn dress on! Elena!" Brenda screamed, her face twisted with greed. She threw the heavy white fabric at me. It wasn't a wedding dress. It looked like a shroud. "The Blackwood car is waiting outside. Don't you dare ruin this for us." "I won't do it," I whispered, clutching my bruised wrist. "He's... They say he's dead. Brenda, they say he's a monster. You're selling me to a corpse." "You are worth exactly $5 million. You ungrateful trash." Brenda grabbed my hair, yanking my face up to the mirror. I looked at myself, pale, terrified, a sacrificial lamb. "Your father gambled away the house. The loan sharks are coming tonight. If you don't marry that vegetable heir, they will chop us up into little pieces. So yes, you are marrying a corpse, and you will smile while doing it." Tiffany, my stepsister, sat on the bed, scrolling through her phone. She laughed, creating a bubble with her gum. "Look on the bright side, sis. At least he can't cheat on you, because, he's in a coma, or maybe he's a zombie. Who cares? Just sign the papers so I can get my new Porsche." My father stood in the doorway, looking at the floor. He didn't say a word. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. That hurt more than Brenda's slap, the betrayal of blood. "5 minutes!" Brenda hissed, slamming the door. I put on the dress. It was cold. It smelled of old lilies and formaldehyde. 2 massive bodyguards in black suits dragged me out of the house. Literally dragged. My heels scraped against the pavement. The neighbors watched from behind their curtains. Nobody called the police. In this neighborhood, money talks, and the Blackwoods owned the conversation. They shoved me into the back of a black limousine with tinted windows. The leather was freezing. "Ms. Rossi?" A lawyer sat opposite me. He didn't offer a hand. He offered a document and a pen. "Sign. The transfer of funds to your family occurs only after the ceremony." "Ceremony?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this?" "The master requires a legal spouse to unlock his inheritance fund. You are simply a biological necessity, a vessel." He looked at me with pure disgust, as if I were a stain on the upholstery. "Do not speak to the guests. Do not look at the family members. You are bought property. You have no voice here." I signed. I signed away my life for a father who sold me. The car drove up the winding road to the Blackwood estate. It was a fortress of dark stone, looming against the stormy sky like a beast waiting to swallow me whole. Thunder rumbled. It felt like a horror movie, but the terror in my chest was real. We entered the grand hall. It didn't look like a wedding. It looked like a funeral. Hundreds of people in black stood in silence. The air was freezing. There were no flowers, only candles. Thousands of candles flickering in the draft. "Here comes the gold digger," someone whispered loudly. "Look at her dress, cheap, just like her mother." "I give her a week before the accident happens. The Blackwood curse kills everyone." I walked down the aisle alone. My legs were shaking so hard, I thought I would collapse. At the altar, there was no groom standing, there was a casket. An intricate, black mahogany casket lined with velvet. The priest, if he was even a priest, muttered words in Latin. I didn't understand. I just stared at the casket. This was my husband. "Do you, Elena Rossi, take Victor Blackwood as your lawful husband, to honor and obey, until death?" The priest paused, a cruel smirk on his lips. "Well, death is already here. Do you—" My throat was dry. Brenda was in the front row, glaring at me, mouthing the word money. "I do." "Then I pronounce you man and wife." There was no kiss, no applause. just the heavy thud of the lawyer stamping a document. "Take her to the master's chambers." A cold voice boomed. It was Marcus Blackwood, Victor's uncle. He looked at me like I was a parasite he needed to exterminate. "And lock the door. We don't want our new bride wandering around." The bodyguards threw me into a room and slammed the heavy oak door. Click. The lock turned. "Hello," I banged on the door. "Let me out, please." Silence. I turned around. The room was massive, decorated in Victorian style. Heavy drapes covered every window. Not a single ray of sunlight could enter. It was pitch black, save for a single candelabra near the bed. And there he was, lying on the king-size bed, pale as moonlight, hands folded over his chest. Victor Blackwood. He was terrifyingly beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, raven black hair, eyelashes that cast long shadows. He looked like a fallen angel carved from marble. But he was cold. So cold. Tubes were connected to his arm, pumping a dark red fluid. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Was he dead, Comatose? "I'm sorry," I whispered, trembling. "I didn't want this. They made me." I reached out to touch his hand, just to see if he was warm, to see if I was alone in this nightmare with a corpse. My fingertips brushed his skin. It was ice cold. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently. A gust of wind howled through the room, even though the windows were shut. I gasped and pulled my hand back. Thump, thump! A sound, a heartbeat. No, it was too slow, too heavy. Thump, thump! The machine next to the bed beeped once, a low, menacing sound. I backed away, terrified. Is anyone there? Then it happened. The hand I had just touched twitched. His fingers curled into a fist, crushing the silk sheets. I screamed, stumbling back, tripping over my dress. I fell hard onto the cold floor, scraping my knees. On the bed, Victor Blackwood sat up. His movement was unnatural, fluid, predatory, like a puppet having its strings yanked. He turned his head slowly. The tubes ripped out of his arm, dripping dark red blood onto the pristine white sheets. He opened his eyes. They weren't human. They were glowing with a feral, crimson hunger. He looked at me, not like a husband looks at a wife, but like a wolf looks at a rabbit. "Who?" His voice was a guttural growl, unused for years, vibrating through the floorboards. "Who woke me?" He swung his legs off the bed. He stood up, towering over the room. The air grew heavy, suffocating. He took one step towards me, then another. I scrambled backward, pressing my back against the locked door. "Stay back, please." He didn't stop. He moved with impossible speed. In a blink, he was right in front of me. His cold hand grabbed my throat. He lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the scent of rain and old blood. "You smell..." He inhaled deeply, his eyes widening as the red glow intensified. "Delicious." His fangs lengthened. His grip was absolute. I clawed at the hand crushing my windpipe. It was like striking marble, cold, hard, and unyielding. My feet dangled inches off the floor, kicking helplessly against the heavy oak door. The air in my lungs was burning, turning into panic and fire. "Please," I choked out, the word barely a squeak. Victor Blackwood didn't blink. Those crimson eyes bore into mine, stripping away every layer of my soul. There was no humanity in them, only hunger, a primal, starving emptiness that had been denied for too long. He tilted his head, studying my struggle like a scientist observing a moth pinned to a board. "Fear," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together deep underground. "It makes the heart pump faster, it makes the flavor richer." He pulled me closer. The smell of him was intoxicating and terrifying all at once, Expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of old blood and rain. I could feel the cold radiating from his body, seeping into my bones. He wasn't just a man. He was a predator. And I was the rabbit caught in the trap. He lowered his face to my neck. I felt his breath ice cold against my pulse point. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. Thump, 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 thump. No, I whimpered, tears leaking from my eyes. I'm not food, I'm your wife. He paused. A low, dark chuckle vibrated in his chest. Wife? The word dripped with mockery. You are a contract. You are a signature on a piece of paper. And you are dinner. He opened his mouth. I saw the flash of white, elongated canines, sharp as needles. I squeezed my eyes shut and braced for the pain. I thought of my father, who sold me. I thought of Brenda, counting her money. I was going to die here, in this dark, velvet-draped room, and no one would even care. His teeth grazed my skin, a sharp sting like a paper cut. Then he froze. The pressure on my throat didn't loosen, but the bite didn't come. Victor inhaled sharply, his nose brushing against my jugular. His body went rigid, like a statue. A strange sound escaped his throat, half growl, half purr. What is this? He whispered. The red glow in his eyes flickered, dimming slightly to a deep, dangerous maroon. He pulled back just an inch to look at me again. But this time, the look wasn't just hunger, it was confusion. And something else, greed, possessiveness. You don't smell like the others, he muttered, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a bruising force. The others. They smelled like cheap perfume and fear, rotting flowers. But you... He leaned in again, inhaling deeply, his nose burying into my hair. I trembled, paralyzed by the proximity of death. You smell like life, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. Pure, untainted, rare. He abruptly dropped me. I crumbled to the floor, gasping for air, clutching my throat. My lungs burned as I sucked in oxygen. I coughed violently, curling into a ball, trying to make myself as small as possible. Victor stood over me, looming like a dark tower. The red in his eyes had faded to a pitch-black abyss, but the menace was still there. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looking down at me with cold calculation. You are too valuable to drain in one night, he declared. The decision was made. It wasn't mercy. It was resource management. He walked over to the velvet armchair in the corner and sat down, crossing his long legs. He looked like a king on a throne of shadows. You are not a wife. Elena, you are my pantry, my private reserve. If you try to run, I will find you. If you try to scream, I will silence you. He pointed a pale finger at the corner of the room, far away from the bed. Sit there. Don't move. Don't sleep. If I hear you breathe too loudly, I might change my mind and finish what I started. I didn't argue. I scrambled to the corner. Dragging my heavy wedding dress, I pulled my knees to my chest. Burying my face in my arms, I watched him through the gaps in my hair. He didn't move for the rest of the night. He just sat there, in the dark, watching me. His eyes never closed. He was a statue of death, waiting for the sun to fail. The hours dragged on like centuries. Every shadow in the room looked like a monster. The cold seeped through the floorboards, numbing my legs. I was exhausted, terrified, and hungry, but I didn't dare close my eyes. Finally, a sliver of gray light peeked through the heavy curtains. Morning. I was still alive. Suddenly, the heavy oak lock clicked. Clack! I flinched, pressing my back harder into the wall. Victor was gone. The armchair was empty. The massive bed was perfectly made, as if no one had slept in it. Where did he go? The door creaked open. Stay behind me. A sharp, authoritative female voice ordered. And bring the cleanup bag. The master is usually messy when he wakes up from a long cycle. A woman stepped in. She was tall, severe, wearing a pristine black housekeeper's uniform. Her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled her face into a permanent scowl. Mrs. Gersh, the head housekeeper. Behind her, two large men in jumpsuits carried a long, black zipper bag, a body bag. They were here to collect my corpse. Mrs. Gersh marched into the room. Not even looking around, she gestured to the bed. Check the sheets. If there's blood, burn them. If the girl is in pieces, make sure you get everything. Mr. Marcus doesn't want to smell. Yes, ma'am, the men grunted. I let out a shaky breath. I'm here. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Gersh spun around. Her eyes widened. The two men dropped the body bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. They stared at me as if I were a ghost. I slowly stood up, my legs trembling. My wedding dress was wrinkled and stained with dust from the floor. My neck was bruised purple in the shape of a handprint, but I was breathing. Impossible, Mrs. Gersh whispered. She took a step back, clutching the cross necklace around her neck. No one survives the awakening night. No one. I'm sorry to disappoint you, I said, my voice hoarse but surprisingly steady. A spark of anger ignited in my chest, burning through the fear. They had expected me to die. They had planned for me to die. You can take your bag back. I won't be needing it today. Mrs. Gersh's shock turned into a sneer. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the bruises on my neck. You survived, or did he just find you too distasteful to eat? Before I could answer, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. What is the delay? A smooth, arrogant voice cut through the air. Is the trash taken out yet? Marcus Blackwood walked in. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, looking every inch the corporate shark. He adjusted his silk tie, expecting to see a cleanup operation. When he saw me standing there, his face went slack. The mask of indifference cracked. For a second, I saw pure, unadulterated rage. You, Marcus hissed. He looked from me to the empty bed, then back to me. How? Victor, I stammered, not knowing how to explain the monster I saw last night. Marcus marched up to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cigars and cruelty. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look up at him. He examined the bruises on my neck with clinical detachment. He marked you, Marcus muttered, his eyes narrowing. He didn't kill you. He claimed you. He shoved my face away as if touching me had dirtied his hands. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his fingers. The disrespect was palpable. To him. I wasn't a human who had just survived a trauma. I was a glitch in his spreadsheet. An error he needed to correct. Mrs. Gersh, Marcus barked, turning his back on me. Take this thing to the servants' quarters in the basement. Since she is still breathing, she can earn her keep. We don't feed parasites in this house. The basement, sir, Mrs. Gersh asked, a cruel smile playing on her lips. The one without heating. Exactly, Marcus said coldly. He turned his head slightly, giving me one last look of utter contempt. You might have survived the night, Elena, but don't think you've won. You are just a walking blood bank now, and in this house, blood is cheap. Wait, I said, finding a sudden surge of adrenaline. I am Victor's wife, legally. You can't put me in the basement. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Wife, oh honey, you are a pet, and pets sleep in the cage. Get her out of my sight. The two men who had brought the body bag grabbed my arms. Their grip was rough, bruising my already tender skin. They dragged me out of the luxurious room, past the stunned maids in the hallway, towards the dark service stairs. I didn't fight them. I couldn't. But as they dragged me away, I looked back at the heavy oak door of Victor's room. He hadn't killed me. He said I was rare. That was my only card. and I had to figure out how to play it before Marcus found a way to finish what Victor started. The bucket of ice-cold water hit me before I could even stand up. "Wake up, princess." Mrs. Gersh's voice cracked like a whip. "The honeymoon is over." I gasped, sputtering as the dirty, gray water soaked my already ruined wedding dress. I was lying on a thin, moldy mattress in the corner of the boiler room. It was damp, dark, and smelled of rust and dead rats. My body ached from the cold, my stomach twisted in a painful knot of hunger. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. "Get up," she barked, kicking the sole of my shoe. "Mr. Marcus was clear. You earn your keep. And in this house, trash like you starts at the bottom." She threw a bundle of clothes at my face. It wasn't a maid's uniform. It was a gray, shapeless jumpsuit, made of coarse fabric that felt like sandpaper. On the back, stenciled in faded red letters, was the word disposal. "Change," she ordered, checking her expensive watch. "You have 2 minutes, then you scrub the wine cellar, every inch, with this." She tossed a toothbrush onto the wet concrete floor. I looked at the tiny brush, then up at her stone-cold face. "The wine cellar. That room is huge. It will take days." "Then you better start scrubbing fast," she sneered. "No food until the floor shines. And if I see a single speck of dust on the vintage bottles, you sleep outside with the guard dogs." I gritted my teeth. My pride wanted to scream, to throw the brush at her, but my survival instinct honed by years of living with Brenda told me to obey. For now, I needed to stay alive. I was Victor's rare find. He would look for me. I just had to survive until nightfall. The wine cellar was a dungeon. It was vast, filled with thousands of bottles of wine worth more than my life. The stone floor was rough and covered in years of grime. I scrubbed. My hands, already bruised from the previous night, turned red and raw. The harsh chemical cleaner burned my skin, making my eyes water. Scrub, rinse, scrub, rinse. Hours bled into each other. My knees felt like they were shattering against the stone. My stomach growled so loudly it echoed in the silent vault. Around noon, the heavy iron door creaked open. The smell of roasted chicken wafted in, rich and savory. My mouth watered instantly. It was a torture I hadn't expected. Tiffany, my stepsister, walked in. She was holding a plate of gourmet food. She wasn't here to help. She was on a tour of the mansion with Marcus, playing the role of the grieving sister-in-law perfectly. "Oh my God," Tiffany laughed, covering her mouth in mock horror. "Look at her, Cinderella really lost her slipper, huh?" Marcus stood behind her, sipping a glass of amber liquid. He looked at me, scrubbing the floor like I was a cockroach he had forgotten to crush. "Is the staff treating you well, Elena?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I need food," I said, my voice hoarse. I stopped scrubbing and looked up. "Please, just some bread." Tiffany took a bite of a chicken leg, chewing slowly, savoring it right in front of my face. She tossed the half-eaten bone onto the floor, right where I had just cleaned. It landed with a wet splat, leaving a grease stain. "Oops," she giggled. "Butterfingers. There you go, sis. Dinner is served." Marcus chuckled. "See, we feed the animals. Eat up. Elena, that's imported organic chicken. Better than anything your father ever bought you." Humiliation burned hotter than the chemicals on my hands. They wanted me to crawl. They wanted me to pick that bone up off the floor like a dog. I stared at the bone, then I stared at them. "Pick it up," Marcus ordered, his smile vanishing. "Show us your gratitude." "No," I whispered. "What did you say?" "I said no." I stood up, clutching the toothbrush like a weapon. "I am not a dog. I am a human being. And I am Victor Blackwood's wife." Marcus's face darkened. He stepped forward and kicked the bucket of dirty water over. The gray sludge flooded the floor I had spent 4 hours cleaning. "You are nothing," he hissed. "Mrs. Gersh, lock her in here. Turn off the lights. Let's see if the rats can teach her some manners. The heavy iron door slammed shut. The lock engaged with a deafening clank. Darkness swallowed me whole. Absolute, suffocating darkness. I slid down against the cold wall, pulling my knees to my chest. I didn't pick up the chicken bone. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But as the silence stretched on, and the temperature dropped, I began to shiver uncontrollably. Victor, I whispered into the void. Where are you? Somewhere above, the sun began to set. The transition from day to night in the Blackwood estate was not subtle. It was a shift in the atmosphere. The shadows lengthened, twisting into claws. The air grew heavy and charged with static electricity. In the master suite, the heavy velvet curtains blocked out the last rays of the dying sun. On the massive bed, Victor Blackwood opened his eyes. Hunger. It hit him like a physical blow. A burning, clawing emptiness in his gut. His throat was dry, parched for the specific, sweet nectar he had tasted last night. He sat up, his movements fluid and predatory. He inhaled deeply, expecting the scent of rain and purity, the scent of her. Nothing. The room smelled of lemon polish and stale air. Victor frowned, his brow furrowed. He looked at the corner where he had told her to stay. Empty. Elena! His voice was a low rumble, barely human. He stood up, his height filling the room. He walked to the corner. He touched the floor where she had sat. Cold. She had been gone for hours. A low growl started in his chest. It wasn't just hunger. It was insult. He had claimed her. He had marked her. In his twisted, centuries-old logic, that made her his property, and someone had dared to steal from him. He stormed to the door. He didn't turn the handle. He didn't have the patience. He shoved the heavy oak door with one hand. The wood splintered around the lock, and the door flew open, crashing against the hallway wall with a thunderous boom. The maids in the hallway screamed and dropped their linens. Victor ignored them. He walked down the corridor, his bare feet making no sound on the expensive carpet. He looked like a nightmare brought to life wearing only black silk pajama pants, his chest bare and pale as marble, his eyes glowing with a terrifying crimson light. He sniffed the air. Roast chicken, cigar smoke, fear, sweat. And underneath it all, a faint, fading trail of her, mixed with the acrid smell of chemical cleaners and mold. His eyes narrowed, the red glow intensified until it looked like two burning coals. He followed the scent, down the grand staircase, past the dining room where Marcus was entertaining guests. Marcus was laughing, raising a glass of wine. To the future of Blackwood Industries, may the weak fall and the strong rise. Crash! The double doors of the dining room exploded inward. Splinters of wood and glass rained down on the guests. Silence fell over the room. Victor stood in the wreckage of the doorway. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His skin was translucent in the candlelight, his veins visible and pulsing black. Victor! Marcus stood up, his glass shattering in his hand. His face went pale. You're awake, but the sedative... Victor didn't look at the guests. He looked straight at his uncle. Where? Victor said, his voice a calm, deadly whisper that carried across the room. Is my wife? She's resting, Marcus stammered, sweating profusely. She was tired. Victor tilted his head. He inhaled. You lie. He moved. It was a blur. 1 second he was at the door. The next he was standing in front of Marcus. He grabbed Marcus by the throat and lifted him 1 foot off the ground. The guests screamed and scrambled away. I smell her fear on you, Victor snarled, exposing his fangs. And I smell the basement. He threw Marcus across the room. The man crashed into a buffet table, sending dishes flying. Victor turned and marched towards the kitchen. The servants scattered like roaches. He didn't run. He stalked. He knew exactly where she was now. The scent of her distress was calling to him like a siren. I was huddled in the dark, freezing. I thought I was hallucinating. First, I heard the screams upstairs, then the heavy thud of footsteps. Then, the iron door of the wine cellar shook. Bam! Something massive hit it from the other side. Dust fell from the ceiling. Bam! The metal groaned, the lock sparked. Crunch. The entire heavy iron door was ripped off its hinges. It fell inward with a deafening crash, missing me by inches. Light flooded the cellar. Not sunlight, but the artificial light from the hallway, silhouetting a massive figure. Victor. He stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His eyes were glowing so bright they illuminated the dark corners of the room. He looked wild, unhinged. He scanned the room until his eyes locked on me. I must have looked pathetic, huddled in a dirty gray jumpsuit, shivering, with a toothbrush in my hand. He let out a sound that was pure animal rage. He stepped over the fallen door and crossed the distance in 2 strides. I flinched, covering my head, expecting him to be angry at me. But he didn't hit me. He reached down and scooped me up into his arms as if I were a feather. His skin was cold, but compared to the freezing cellar, he felt like a furnace. "Who put you in these rags?" he growled, looking at the coarse jumpsuit. He ripped the fabric at the shoulder with one swift tear, exposing my bruised skin. He saw the chemical burns on my hands. His jaw clenched so hard I heard a tooth crack. "They made me clean," I whispered, my teeth chattering. "They said I'm trash." Trash. Victor laughed. It was a terrifying, manic sound. "You are the only living thing in this house worth keeping." He turned around, holding me tight against his bare chest. He walked out of the cellar, carrying me past the terrified staff. Mrs. Gersh was standing at the top of the stairs, trembling, holding a crucifix. "Master, she is just a servant." Victor stopped. He looked at Mrs. Gersh. "You," he said softly, "you like cleaning." Mrs. Gersh couldn't speak. She nodded frantically. "Good," Victor said, "because you will lick the cellar floor clean, with your tongue. If there is a single spot left by sunrise, I will drain every drop of blood from your body." He didn't wait for her answer. He carried me up the stairs, back to the world of velvet and shadows. "Hold on," he murmured into my hair, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, becoming almost gentle. "You are freezing, and your heart rate is too slow." He kicked open the door to the master bedroom. He placed me on the silk sheets, the same sheets I had feared the night before. Now, they felt like heaven. They felt... He climbed onto the bed, hovering over me. The hunger was back in his eyes. But it was different now. It was mixed with a fierce, possessive fury. "You belong to me," he whispered, his fangs grazing my earlobe. "Not to them. Me. And no one touches my property." He grabbed my wrist, the one bruised by the handcuffs of labor, and brought it to his lips. He licked the wound. "Now," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Feed me, and I will give you the strength to destroy them. Feed me." The command hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Victor's eyes were no longer just glowing. They were burning with a desperate, starvation-fueled madness. His grip on my wrist was iron tight, his thumb pressing against the fragile blue vein pulsing beneath my skin. I trembled, looking at the sharp, white points of his fangs. This was it. This was the moment I became nothing more than livestock. "Do it," I whispered, closing my eyes. I didn't want to see the monster. I just wanted it to be over. Victor didn't hesitate. He didn't strike like a snake. He lowered his head slowly, almost reverently. I felt his cold breath against the sensitive skin of my inner wrist. Then, a sharp, stinging pinch. I gasped, my body instinctively trying to pull away, but he held me fast. Stay, he growled against my skin, the vibration running up my arm. Then the pain vanished. It was replaced by something impossible. As he began to drink, a wave of warmth flooded my body. It wasn't the cold drain of death I had expected. It was a rush of pure, liquid heat. It started at my wrist and shot straight to my heart. Exploding like a firework, my knees went weak. My head spun with a sudden, dizzying euphoria. It felt like floating, like drinking champagne on an empty stomach, but 1,000 times more potent. I opened my eyes. The room seemed to pulse in time with his swallowing. I looked down at him. The terrifying corpse-like pallor of his skin was changing right before my eyes. The translucent gray was flushing with color. The sunken hollows of his cheeks were filling out. The black veins that had marred his handsome face were fading, retreating beneath smooth, marble-like skin. He wasn't just taking my blood. He was taking my life, and in return, he was giving me his power. I felt a strange tug in my chest, a connection, like a hook sinking into my soul, tethering me to him. I could feel his satisfaction. I could feel his strength returning. It was intoxicating. "Victor," I breathed, my free hand involuntarily reaching out to tangle in his raven black hair. He groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure pleasure. He took one last, deep pull, and then released me. He pulled back, his chest heaving. He ran his tongue over his lips, catching a single drop of crimson. He was breathtaking. Gone was the walking dead man. In his place sat a god. His skin was now a healthy, pale gold. His lips were full and red. His muscles seemed to have expanded, rippling with renewed vitality under his silk shirt. His eyes, no longer glowing a demonic red, had settled into a deep, mesmerizing shade of garnet. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was clarity, sharp, dangerous intelligence. "You?" His voice was no longer gravel. It was smooth, rich dark chocolate. "You taste like salvation." I tried to sit up, but the room tilted. "I feel dizzy." "Sleep," he commanded softly. He reached out and touched my forehead. His hand was no longer ice cold. It was warm. "You have paid your debt for tonight. Now, let me pay mine." He pushed me gently back onto the pillows. He pulled the heavy duvet over me, tucking me in as if I were something precious, breakable. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Victor Blackwood standing by the window, staring out at the moon, looking like a king who had just reclaimed his crown. Sunlight, real, filtered sunlight. I woke up to the smell of coffee and expensive leather. I blinked, disoriented. The pain in my body was gone. The bruises on my knees from scrubbing the floor faded to faint yellow marks. The chemical burns on my hands soothed. I sat up. I was wearing a silk nightgown that definitely wasn't mine. It felt like water against my skin. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood." I jumped. Victor was sitting in a velvet armchair across the room. He was dressed, and when I say dressed, I mean armed. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him so perfectly it must have been tailored by angels. His hair was styled back, revealing a face so devastatingly handsome it made my breath hitch. He was reading a newspaper, an actual newspaper. "You," I stammered, pulling the duvet up to my chin. "You look alive," he smirked. Folding the paper, he stood up and walked toward the bed. Every movement was graceful, predatory, and oozing with power. "Thanks to you." He sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and took my wrist, the one he had bitten. There was no wound, only two tiny, faint white scars, like a beauty mark. He traced them with his thumb. "Does it hurt?" he asked. No, I admitted. It feels tingly. Good. He let go of my hand and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a card. It was black, made of titanium, heavy and cold. The American Express Centurion. The card that has no limit. The card that can buy islands. He held it out to me. Take it. I stared at the card. What is this? This, Victor said, his eyes darkening with intensity, is your weapon. He placed it in my hand. It felt heavier than it looked. My Uncle Marcus is throwing a memorial gala tonight, Victor said, his voice dripping with venom. He thinks I am still a vegetable. He plans to announce his takeover of Blackwood Industries. He invited the entire board, the press, the elite of New York. He leaned in close, his garnet eyes locking onto mine. I want you to go to that party. Me? I laughed nervously. Victor, look at me. I'm a mess. I have no clothes. I don't know how to be a billionaire's wife. You are my wife, he corrected, his voice leaving no room for argument. That makes you a queen. And a queen does not scrub floors. She does not wear rags. He stood up and walked to the door, opening it. There is a car waiting downstairs, a driver, and personal security. Go to Fifth Avenue, buy a dress, buy jewelry, buy the entire store if you want. I don't care about the cost. He paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. A cruel, vindictive smile played on his lips. But do not buy anything white, or pink, or sweet. What should I buy? I asked, gripping the black card. War paint, Victor said. Buy something that tells them you didn't come to play. You came to conquer. Tonight. Elena, we are not just attending a party. We are attending an execution. The limousine that waited for me wasn't the hearse-like car from the wedding. It was a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom. The driver, a massive man with a scar running down his cheek, opened the door. Good morning, madam. Where to? Fifth Avenue, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Then I looked at the black card in my hand. I remembered Brenda's face when she sold me. I remembered Tiffany throwing the chicken bone on the floor. I remembered Marcus calling me a pet. My grip on the card tightened. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning anger. Take me to the most expensive boutique in the city. I corrected myself, lifting my chin. And call the salon. I need a new look. The shopping trip was a blur of vengeance. I walked into Valentino. The salesgirls looked at my worn-out shoes and sneered. Excuse me, the sale rack is in the basement, one of them said, chewing gum. I didn't say a word. I simply held up the black card. The silence that followed was delicious. The sneer vanished, replaced by panic and sudden, fawning adoration. Close the store, I ordered, channeling Victor's arrogance. I want to try on everything. I spent money like it was water. I bought silk, velvet, diamonds. I bought shoes with heels sharp enough to puncture a lung. I sat in the salon chair for 4 hours while they scrubbed, polished, and painted me. When I looked in the mirror, Elena Rossi, the scared girl from the slums, was gone. Staring back at me was a stranger. Her hair was glossy and dark, styled in waves. Her skin glowed. Her lips were painted a deep, blood red. I was wearing a dress that was illegal in 3 states. It was black velvet, strapless, hugging every curve of my body before pooling at my feet. It had a slit that went up to my thigh, revealing the diamond-encrusted heels. Around my neck hung a necklace of rubies that looked like drops of blood. I looked dangerous. I looked expensive. I looked like I belonged to the night. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Come home, the game begins, V. The drive back to the estate felt different. I wasn't being dragged there. I was returning to my territory. The driveway was packed with luxury cars. Paparazzi were flashing cameras at the entrance. Marcus had really gone all out for his victory party. The driver opened my door. I stepped out, The flashbulbs went off like a lightning storm. Who is that? Is that a movie star? Wait, is that the bride? I ignored them. I walked up the grand steps, my heels clicking on the marble with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I reached the massive double doors of the ballroom. 2 security guards blocked my way. Invitation, one asked rudely. I looked him in the eye. I live here. Sorry, Mr. Marcus said no unauthorized personnel, especially not the help. I was about to reach for my phone to call Victor, but I didn't need to. From inside the ballroom, the music suddenly stopped. The heavy doors slowly creaked open. The room was silent. Hundreds of guests turned to look. And there, at the top of the grand staircase inside, stood Victor. He was magnificent. He exuded an aura of darkness and power that made the air heavy. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me. He slowly extended his hand toward the entrance. "Let her in," Victor's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The security guards turned pale and stepped aside. I took a deep breath. I clutched my clutch bag like a shield. I stepped onto the red carpet. Tiffany was standing near the chocolate fountain, wearing a gaudy pink dress. When she saw me, she dropped her strawberry. Her jaw hit the floor. Brenda dropped her champagne glass. Smash! Marcus, who was standing at the podium about to give a speech, froze. His face went gray. I walked through the crowd. The sea of people parted for me. I didn't look at anyone. I walked straight to the stairs, straight to the monster who was waiting for me. I climbed the steps, 1, 2, 3. When I reached the top, Victor didn't just take my hand, he pulled me close, his arm wrapping around my waist, claiming me in front of the entire world. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, loud enough for the microphone nearby to pick up. "You look hungry, my love. Shall we eat?" The descent down the grand staircase felt less like walking into a party and more like stepping into a gladiator arena. Victor held my hand, his grip firm and possessive. His skin was warm now, radiating a power that seemed to suck the air out of the massive ballroom. Every eye was glued to us. The silence was so thick you could choke on it. Marcus Blackwood stood at the bottom of the stairs, near the podium where he had been about to announce his hostile takeover. His face was a mask of sweating gray putty. He looked at Victor like he was seeing a ghost, and then at me like I was a cockroach wearing a crown. We reached the marble floor. Victor didn't stop. He led me straight toward the center of the room, forcing Marcus to step aside or be run over. "Victor," Marcus managed to choke out, his voice trembling with fake bravado into the microphone he was still holding. "My dear nephew, a miracle, truly. We were just celebrating your memory." Victor stopped. He turned slowly to face his uncle. He didn't smile. He just looked at Marcus with those terrifying garnet eyes that seemed to see every dirty secret hidden in Marcus's soul. "Celebrating my memory." Victor's voice was low, smooth, and lethal. It carried effortlessly through the silent room. "Or spending my money." Marcus laughed nervously, looking around for support from the board members who were now inching away from him. "Don't be absurd. And who is this yes, the little arrangement?" Marcus turned his sneer onto me, trying to regain control by attacking the weakest link. "Elena, darling, that dress is magnificent. Did you steal it from my late sister's closet? Because we all know a gutter rat like you couldn't afford a thread of that silk. You can paint a piece of trash, my dear, but it's still trash." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Brenda and Tiffany, standing nearby, snickered. I felt a flash of the old fear, the urge to shrink away. But then I felt the warmth of Victor's hand on my back. A current of energy, his energy, flowed into me. "Stand tall." His voice echoed in my head. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was a thought placed directly into my mind. I straightened my spine. I didn't look down. I looked straight at Marcus. Victor didn't shout. He didn't attack. He simply raised his free hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Instantly, the massive LED screen behind the stage, the one meant to display Marcus's victory speech, flickered. The image changed. It wasn't a memorial picture of Victor, it was a spreadsheet. It was complex financial data, but the highlights were zoomed in and glowing red. Blackwood Industries, unauthorized offshore transfers. Destination, Cayman Islands, Shell Corp. Account owner Marcus Blackwood, amount 150,000. The room erupted in whispers. Phones were raised, cameras flashing furiously at the screen. Marcus turned pale. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback. Lies. This is fabricated. Victor snapped his fingers again. The screen changed. It was a video, grainy, black and white security footage. The date stamp was yesterday. It showed the wine cellar. It showed me, on my knees, scrubbing the floor in a dirty jumpsuit. It showed Tiffany walking in, laughing, dropping the chicken bone on the wet floor. The audio played clearly over the ballroom speakers. Oops, Butterfingers. There you go. Sis, dinner is served. Then, Marcus's voice. See, we feed the animals. Pick it up. Show us your gratitude. The gasps turned into sounds of disgust. The elite of New York, who prized appearance above all else, were horrified by the naked cruelty on display. Tiffany froze, her half-eaten strawberry hovering near her mouth. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Victor let go of my hand. He stepped back slightly, giving me the stage. Your turn, my queen, his voice whispered in my mind. I didn't hesitate. I walked toward them. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, terrified and mesmerized. I stopped in front of Tiffany. She was wearing pink taffeta, looking like a spoiled cupcake. Her eyes were wide with panic as I approached. You, she stammered. You can't. I didn't say a word. I raised my hand. Slap. The sound echoed through the cavernous room. It wasn't a frantic, desperate slap. It was cold, calculated, and incredibly hard. Tiffany's head snapped to the side. A perfect red handprint bloomed instantly on her cheek, clashing horribly with her pink dress. She stumbled back, tripping over her own feet and landing hard on her backside on the marble floor. She burst into loud, ugly tears. I turned to Brenda. My stepmother, the woman who had sold me for gambling debts. She was clutching a glass of expensive red wine, her knuckles white. She looked at me with pure hatred, but also fear. For the first time in my life, Brenda was afraid of me. Elena, she hissed, you ungrateful little bitch. After everything I did for you. I reached out and calmly took the wine glass from her shaking hand. You're right, Brenda, I said, my voice icy calm. You did so much for me. You taught me that everything has a price. And tonight, I tilted the glass. The dark red liquid poured out in a slow, deliberate stream. It splashed onto her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, running down her expensive white face powder, soaking into the neckline of her designer silver gown. It looked like blood. Tonight, the bill is due. Brenda shrieked, batting at herself, looking like the victim of a horror movie. The wine stained everything it touched. I dropped the empty glass onto the floor at her feet. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Get out of my house, I said. It wasn't a request. It was an eviction. Security, Marcus yelled, trying to regain control of the room. Remove this woman. She assaulted my guests. The security guards did move. 4 massive men in black suits marched onto the floor. But they didn't walk toward me. They walked toward Marcus. The lead guard, the one who had driven me to the salon, pulled out a pair of zip-tie cuffs. Marcus Blackwood, the guard said, his voice monotone. We have instructions from the majority shareholder to detain you pending an FBI investigation into corporate embezzlement and fraud. Marcus struggled, screaming obscenities, as they zip-tied his hands behind his back and dragged him toward the exit, right past the screens still displaying his crimes. The paparazzi went wild, blocking his path to get the money shot of the fallen tycoon. Brenda grabbed Tiffany, dragging her sobbing daughter toward the side exit, slipping on the wine-soaked floor as they fled like rats escaping a sinking ship. The ballroom was chaos, but in the center of it all, there was a calm eye of the storm. Victor held out his hand to me again. "Shall we dance, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, ignoring the mayhem around us. I placed my hand in his. He pulled me close, his other hand resting firmly on the small of my back. The smell of rain and power enveloped me again. The DJ, terrified and confused, frantically changed the music. A heavy, dramatic waltz began to play. Victor led me into the dance. We spun around the floor, dancing on the metaphorical graves of the people who had tried to destroy me. Every turn was a victory. Every step was a declaration of war against the world that had treated me like trash. "You did well," Victor murmured into my ear as we dipped. "But this was just the appetizer, Elena." He pulled me upright, his garnet eyes burning into mine with an intensity that made my knees weak again. The hunger was back in his gaze, not just for blood, but for power. "Marcus was a pawn, a stupid, greedy pawn," Victor whispered, his voice dropping so low only I could hear it over the music. "The real enemy, the ones who put me in that coma for 5 years, they are not in this room. They are much older and much harder to kill." He spun me again, his grip tightening. "And to fight them," he said, his fangs grazing my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. "I am going to need a lot more strength than one feeding can provide. Tonight, Elena, tonight we feast." The limousine ride home was silent, but the air inside was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victor didn't speak. He sat beside me in the dark cabin, his hand resting on my knee. His touch was burning hot, a stark contrast to the icy creature I had met yesterday. He was staring out the window at the passing city lights, his jaw clenched tight. I could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. It wasn't anger. It was hunger. He had used a massive amount of power tonight controlling the screens, breaking the minds of the security guards, holding the entire room in a trance of fear. And now, the bill was due. The moment we entered the master bedroom, the facade of the civilized billionaire dropped. Victor kicked the heavy door shut and locked it with a swift turn of his wrist. He didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight filtering through the velvet curtains was enough. "Elena," he groaned, his voice rough, stripping away the elegance of the ballroom. He was on me before I could take a breath. He pinned me against the wall, his hands caging my face. He didn't kiss me immediately. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, his body trembling against mine. "You smell like victory," he whispered against my skin, "and adrenaline." "Victor!" I gasped, my hands instinctively gripping the lapels of his suit. "You're shaking." "I used too much," he admitted, his voice strained. "The projection, the control. It drains the reserve. I am starving, Elena." He pulled back to look at me. His eyes were no longer garnet. They were a swirling, chaotic vortex of black and crimson. The predator was surfacing, and this time, there was no fear in me, only a strange, magnetic pull. "Then take it," I said, tilting my head back, exposing my throat. "Take what you need." The invitation broke his last thread of restraint. He lifted me up, carrying me to the bed, not with gentleness, but with urgency. He laid me down on the black silk sheets, his body hovering over mine. "This will be different," he warned, his fangs lengthening, glistening in the moonlight. "The wrist is a snack. This is a bond." He didn't wait for my answer. He lowered his head and sank his fangs into the soft, sensitive curve where my neck met my shoulder. Pain, sharp, blinding pain for a split second. Then, the world exploded into white light. If the first time was like champagne, this was like pure, uncut heroin. My back arched off the mattress. A gasp was torn from my throat, but it sounded more like a moan. The heat didn't just rush through my veins, it set my soul on fire. I could feel him, not just his lips on my skin, but him. The barriers between our minds dissolved. I wasn't just Elena Rossi anymore. I was drowning in the ocean that was Victor Blackwood. I felt his power ancient, dark, and intoxicating. I felt his possessiveness a heavy, iron chain wrapping around my heart, screaming mine. And I felt his pleasure a roar of satisfaction that echoed in my own bones. But as he drank deeper, pulling the life force from me to replenish his own, the connection went deeper than he intended. The darkness behind my eyelids shattered. Images violent, jagged, and terrifying flooded my mind. Flashback, not mine, his... It's raining. A warehouse in the docks of Brooklyn. 5 years ago. I know. Victor is tied to a stone table. Chains made of silver burn his skin. He is screaming, but no sound comes out. His throat has been slashed. Surrounding him are 12 figures. They are wearing hooded robes, and on their faces, masks. Golden masks. They are intricate, beautiful, and terrifying, Venetian style, but twisted. Some are crying, some are laughing, some are demons. They gleam under the flickering torchlight. One figure steps forward, the leader. He wears a mask of a golden lion. He holds a dagger made of obsidian. The blood of the first lineage. The lion speaks. His voice is distorted, metallic. It is too dangerous to roam free. We do not kill you. Victor, we bind you. The dagger plunges into Victor's chest. Agony. Pure, white-hot agony. They aren't killing him. They are cursing him. They are locking his soul into a dormant state, trapping the monster inside a paralyzed body. Sleep, the lion chants, until the sun dies. Sleep, and let us feast on your empire. I see the ring on the lion's finger, a heavy gold signet ring. The crest. It looks like a double-headed eagle holding a serpent. I see betrayal. I feel Victor's realization. He knows who is behind the mask. He knows the eyes looking through the gold slits. Uncle, Victor's mind screams. No, not Marcus. Marcus is too stupid. Marcus is standing in the back, terrified, wearing a plain mask. The lion is someone else. Someone powerful, someone I trust. Elena. Victor tore himself away from me with a guttural roar. The connection snapped like a rubber band. I fell back onto the pillows, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would burst. Victor scrambled back to the edge of the bed. He was panting, wiping a streak of blood from his mouth. He looked horrified. You saw, he whispered. It wasn't a question. You saw the night I fell. I sat up, clutching my neck. The wound was already closing, sealed by his saliva, but the phantom pain of the dagger in his memory still throbbed in my chest. The golden masks, I choked out, my voice trembling. They didn't just poison you. They did a ritual. Victor ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wild. I didn't mean for you to go that deep. The blood link, it's unpredictable. He crawled back to me, not as a predator, but as a desperate man. He cupped my face, his thumbs wiping away my tears. Forget it, he commanded, his voice shaking. Forget the masks. It is too dangerous. If they know you saw them, if they know you are my key. The lion, I whispered, looking into his eyes. Who was the lion, Victor? You knew him. Victor went still, his eyes turned to ice. A wall slammed down behind his gaze, shutting me out. Sleep, he said firmly. He pushed me gently down onto the pillows. We have won the battle with Marcus. Let us not start the war with them tonight. He laid down beside me, pulling me into his arms. He held me tight, as if he were trying to shield me from the nightmares in his own head. Exhaustion, heavy and supernatural, pulled me under, but even in my dreams, I saw the glimmer of gold in the shadows. The next morning, the sun was shining, but the warmth didn't reach the room. I woke up alone in the massive bed. The space beside me was cold. Victor. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. He was standing by the balcony door, fully dressed in a casual black sweater and dark jeans. He was staring at a small table near the entrance of the room. On the table sat a box. It was an exquisite box, wrapped in black velvet with a gold ribbon. There was no card, no return address. Mrs. Gersh brought it up, Victor said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. She said it was left at the main gate. No courier, just there. I swung my legs out of bed. What is it? A gift from an admirer after your grand return? No, Victor said. Open it. I walked over to the table. My hands hovered over the velvet box. A cold chill ran down my spine. I untied the gold ribbon. I lifted the lid. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I clamped my hand over my mouth, stumbling back. Resting on a bed of red satin was a mask. A golden mask. It was a tragedy mask, the face twisted in a sorrowful, weeping expression. But the tears on the mask were real, thick. Dried streaks of blood ran from the eye holes down the golden cheeks. And tucked into the mouth of the mask was a single note, cream-colored cardstock, elegant handwriting. I reached out with trembling fingers and took the note. The sleeper has awakened, but the nightmare has just begun. Welcome back, Victor. We missed you. P.S. She tastes delicious. Doesn't she? Don't break her too soon. We want to turn. There was no signature, just a wax seal. The double-headed eagle holding a serpent. Victor took the note from my hand. He read it once, then crushed it in his fist. The paper burst into flames, turning to ash in seconds. They know, Victor whispered, the red glow returning to his eyes, brighter and deadlier than ever before. They know about the blood bond. He looked at me. The look in his eyes terrified me more than the mask. It was the look of a man who was about to burn the world down. Get dressed, Elena, he said, his voice low and dangerous. We are not staying here. The estate is compromised. Where are we going? I asked, looking at the bloody mask. To the only place where money and magic hold no power, Victor said, turning to the window. We are going to hunt a lion. The engines of the Gulfstream G650 screamed like banshees as we tore through the storm clouds. New York City was disappearing beneath us, a glittering grid of lies and betrayal. I pressed my forehead against the cold window of the private jet. Watching the world shrink. Down there, people were sleeping, eating, living normal lives. Up here, at 40,000 feet, I was fleeing a cult of masked billionaires with a husband who drank blood for breakfast. Stop looking back. Victor's voice cut through the hum of the cabin. There is nothing there for you anymore. He was sitting across from me in a leather swivel chair that cost more than my father's house. He held a glass of dark red liquid synthetic this time, a nutrient blend he kept for emergencies, swirling it thoughtfully. He looked tired. The confrontation at the gala and the discovery of the mask had drained him. Where are we going, Victor? I asked, turning away from the window. You said an island. Which one? Isla de la Sombra, he replied, taking a sip. It's uncharted on public maps. It used to be a drug lord's fortress before I acquired it. It has its own air defense system. No one lands there without my permission, not even the lion. He placed the glass down and slid a sleek black tablet across the mahogany table toward me. If we are to survive, he said, his expression hardening. You need to stop being a victim and start being a partner. You asked who the lion was. You asked about the order. I looked at the tablet. The screen was black, save for a single fingerprint scanner. This contains the encrypted files I managed to steal from Marcus's private server before I crushed him, Victor explained. It's a list of potential contacts, shareholders, and people who were present at my ritual 5 years ago. I haven't gone through all of it yet. I need you to be my eyes while I rest. He stood up, unbuttoning his cuffs. The altitude. It affects my circulation. I need to go into the hyperbaric chamber in the back for a few hours. Can you handle the truth, Elena? I placed my hand on the tablet. It was cold. I've survived being sold, married to a corpse, and hunted by a cult. I think I can handle a PDF file. Victor almost smiled. It was a ghost of a smile, sad and fleeting. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. His lips were cool. Be careful what you dig for. My love, sometimes, ignorance is the only mercy we get. He disappeared into the rear bedroom, leaving me alone in the main cabin. The flight attendant, a silent, muscular woman who looked more like a bodyguard, refilled my water glass and vanished into the galley. I took a deep breath and pressed my thumb to the screen. Access granted. The screen flooded with data, photos, bank transfers, surveillance logs. It was a spiderweb of corruption. Folder the Order of the Golden Mask, Project Sanguine. I opened it. My heart hammered against my ribs. These were the people who ruled the world from the shadows. I scrolled through the profiles. Senator John H. Miller. The Fox Mask orchestrated 3 wars in the Middle East to lower oil prices for the order. CEO Takashi Yamamoto. The Serpent Mask poisoned a river in Brazil to cover up a failed experiment. Baroness von Schroeder. The Peacock Mask ran a high-end human trafficking ring disguised as a modeling agency. They were monsters, all of them, and they were the ones who had stood around Victor's body, chanting, stabbing him with a cursed dagger. I scrolled down to the lower tiers, the support staff, the enablers, subfolder acquisition and logistics. Let's see who helps these psychos, I muttered to myself, taking a sip of water. I expected to see names of fixers, hitmen, corrupt lawyers. And I did. But then, a file caught my eye. It was labeled The Gatekeeper. Status active, role procurement of vessels, clearance level 4. I clicked on it. The photo loaded slowly over the satellite Wi-Fi. When it finally popped up, the glass slipped from my hand. It hit the thick carpet with a muffled thud, spilling water everywhere. I couldn't breathe. The cabin felt like it was shrinking, crushing me. The man in the photo wasn't wearing a mask. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked younger, sharper, cleaner. He was holding a glass of champagne, smiling at the camera with a charming, confident grin. It was my father, Mario Rossi. Not the shaking, crying, gambling addict who begged for loans. Not the pathetic man who couldn't look me in the eye when he signed the marriage contract. This was a predator. I read the text next to the photo, my vision blurring with nausea. Subject Mario Rossi code. Name Janus. Mission Infiltration and Breeding Program. Notes. Subject Janus was assigned to infiltrate the lower class to hide the lineage. He was tasked with raising specimen E. Elena in a high-stress environment to cultivate resilience and despair, key flavors for the awakening ritual. Gambling debts. Fabricated. The debts were a cover story to justify the sale of Specimen E to the Blackwood estate without raising suspicion from the authorities. The transaction was a direct handover to the order. Payment, $5,000 received, plus re-entry into the inner circle upon successful delivery. I gagged. I physically gagged. I ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the sink before I retched. Nothing came out but bile. It was a lie, my entire life. The poverty, the hunger, the nights I held my father while he cried about his bad luck at the poker table, the times I worked 3 jobs to pay off his sharks. It was all a script. He wasn't a victim of his addiction. He was an actor. He had raised me to be sold. He had intentionally made my life a living hell because— what did the file say? To cultivate resilience and despair. They wanted a traumatized bride. They wanted someone broken enough to accept the darkness, but strong enough to survive it. Dad, I whispered to the mirror. My reflection looked pale, ghostly. You didn't just sell me. You made me for them. I washed my face with freezing cold water, scrubbing my skin as if I could wash away the DNA I shared with that monster. I walked back to the tablet. I needed to know more. I needed to know if he was still alive. If Brenda knew. I scrolled down to the recent logs. Date yesterday. From Janus Mario Rossi. To the Lion. Message. The package has been delivered, but the Blackwood boy is awake. This was not part of the deal. I demand extraction. If he finds out I was the one who drugged his wine 5 years ago, he will hunt me down. I froze. My father. My father was the one who poisoned Victor. Victor had said, "The lion is someone I trust." But he was betrayed by someone close. The wine. My mind raced. 5 years ago, my father worked as a sommelier at a high-end restaurant. A restaurant Victor frequented. It was the only honest job he ever had. He had served Victor the poison. And then he had raised me to be Victor's cure or his jailer, depending on what the order wanted. A shadow fell over the table. I jumped, spinning around. Victor was standing there. He hadn't been sleeping. Or maybe he had sensed my distress. He was wearing a silk robe, his chest bare. He looked at me, then at the tablet, then back to me. He saw the photo of my father on the screen. His expression didn't change. It remained stoic, unreadable. But the temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees. Frost began to form on the windows. You knew, I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and betrayal. You knew who he was. I suspected, Victor said calmly. I recognized his scent at the wedding. The smell of the poison was faint, hidden under the stench of cheap whiskey and fear, but I remembered it. Why didn't you tell me? I screamed. Why did you let me mourn him? Why did you let me think he was just a pathetic loser? Because you needed to see it, Victor said, walking closer. If I told you that your father was a monster, you would have defended him. You would have made excuses. He's sick, you would say. He loves me deep down. He stopped right in front of me, grabbing my shoulders. Now you know, Victor hissed, his eyes glowing faintly. There is no love in this world, Elena, except what we take. He didn't love you, he farmed you. I collapsed against his chest, sobbing. The pain was worse than any physical blow. It was the total annihilation of my past. I was an orphan. Worse than an orphan, I was a product. Victor wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight while I cried. Cry, he murmured into my hair. Let the tears wash away the weak girl who loved her daddy. Because when we land on that island, Elena, that girl needs to be dead. He lifted my chin, forcing me to look at him. We are going to find him. Victor promised. Janus, the gatekeeper, and I will let you decide how he dies. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently. The lights in the cabin flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. Sir! The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Panicked. We have a lock-on surface-to-air missile radar shows. It's a drone swarm. Victor looked out the window. Below us, emerging from the clouds like a swarm of angry hornets, were black drones. And painted on the wing of the lead drone was a symbol in gold. A double-headed eagle. They found us, Victor snarled, pushing me toward the back of the plane. Strap in. They aren't waiting for us to land. Boom! An explosion rocked the left wing. The plane tilted sharply. Gravity slammed me against the wall. We were going down. The ocean hit us like a concrete wall. There was no cinematic fade to black. There was only the screaming of tearing metal, the deafening roar of the explosion, and then the brutal, bone-crushing impact. Gravity ceased to exist. My stomach slammed into my throat. The world spun in a violent kaleidoscope of fire and water. Elena, Victor's roar was the last thing I heard before the cabin disintegrated. He didn't try to save himself. He didn't brace for impact. In that split second, the monster who ruled New York became a human shield. He unbuckled his seatbelt and threw himself over me, wrapping his massive body around mine like a cocoon of steel and silk. Crash! Freezing water rushed in, instant and suffocating. It was pitch black. The salt stung my eyes. The pressure threatened to pop my eardrums. We were sinking, fast. I thrashed, panic seizing my limbs. I was trapped in the wreckage of the luxury jet, now just a coffin of aluminum sinking into the abyss. A hand grabbed my waist, strong, unyielding. Victor. He kicked, a powerful, supernatural thrust that shattered the fuselage window next to us. He dragged me out through the jagged opening, into the open ocean. We clawed our way up. My lungs were burning, screaming for air. I saw the surface, a shimmering ceiling of moonlight far above. I kicked with everything I had, but my dress was heavy, pulling me down. Victor didn't let go. He swam with one arm, towing me upward with impossible speed, fighting the current, fighting the debris, fighting the ocean itself. We broke the surface. Gasp! Air. Sweet, sharp, salty air. I coughed violently, expelling seawater, clinging to Victor's shoulders. We were bobbing in the swells, surrounded by burning debris and oil slicks. "Victor," I choked out, wiping the hair from my eyes. We made it!" He didn't answer. His breathing was ragged, wet. "Victor." I looked at him. The moonlight was fading. The sky to the east was turning a bruised purple. Dawn was coming. "Land," he rasped, pointing a shaking hand toward a dark shape on the horizon. It wasn't the sanctuary island. It was a jagged, wild mass of jungle and rock about a mile away. "Swim," he commanded, "before the sun's—" He didn't finish the sentence. He started to swim toward the shore, but his movements were jerky, uneven. The grace of the predator was gone. I swam beside him, fueled by adrenaline and terror. I knew what the sun did to him. It wouldn't just burn him, it would incinerate him. And looking at the brightening sky. We had maybe 20 minutes before the first direct rays hit the water. We hit the beach just as the horizon began to bleed gold. I crawled onto the sand, my limbs feeling like lead jelly. I collapsed, coughing up salt water, sand gritting against my cheek. I wanted to lie there forever. I wanted to close my eyes and wake up in my old, crappy apartment, worrying about rent, not drone strikes and vampires. But a groan made me scramble to my knees. Victor had collapsed in the surf. The waves were washing over his legs, but he wasn't moving to pull himself up. "Victor!" I scrambled over to him, grabbing his arm. "Get up. We have to move the sun." I pulled. He was dead weight, 200 pounds of muscle and bone. "Leave me," he whispered, his face pressed into the wet sand. "Hide yourself." "Shut up!" I screamed, anger flaring hot in my chest. "You don't get to die. You don't get to quit. Get up." I grabbed him by the collar of his ruined shirt and heaved. Adrenaline hysterical strength surged through me. I dragged him inch by inch up the beach, away from the waterline. Then I saw his back. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. A jagged piece of the plane's aluminum hull, about the size of a dinner plate, was embedded deep in his right shoulder blade. Black. Viscous blood oozed around the metal. The skin around it was shredded, exposing muscle and bone. He had taken the shrapnel for me. If he hadn't covered me, that metal would have cut me in half. "Oh God," I sobbed, tears mixing with the seawater on my face. "Sizzle." A ray of sunlight, filtering through the palm trees, hit his ankle. Smoke instantly curled up from his skin, accompanied by the smell of burning meat. Victor hissed in agony, his body arching. The cave. I looked around frantically. There has to be a cave. The jungle line was dense, a wall of green. But about 50 yards away, near a cluster of rocks, I saw a shadow, a fissure in the cliff face. Victor, I need you to help me, I begged, grabbing his good arm. Please, one last time. He gritted his teeth, his fangs extending in pain. He forced his eyes open. They were dull, the garnet light fading to a muddy brown. With a roar of effort, he pushed himself up. I wedged my shoulder under his arm. We stumbled across the sand. A three-legged race against the sun. The heat on my back was intensifying. Every second felt like an hour. Almost there, I panted, my legs shaking under his weight. Just 10 more steps. We reached the fissure. It was tight, but it opened up into a small, damp limestone cave. We collapsed inside just as the full sun crested the horizon, bathing the beach in blinding, deadly light. The cave was cool and smelled of bat guano and salt. It was dark enough. Victor lay on the stone floor, his breathing shallow and fast. The piece of metal in his back was still there, a grotesque monument to his sacrifice. I need to take it out, I said, my voice shaking. I knelt beside him, my hands hovering over the wound. No, Victor gasped, clutching my wrist. His skin was burning up, a fever response to the trauma. If you pull it, I bleed out. The healing, it's too slow. Without blood. You need blood? I offered my wrist immediately. Take it. No, he pushed me away weakly. You are dehydrated. Shock. If I drink now, I might kill you. I can't control. His eyes rolled back in his head. He was slipping into torpor, the coma-like state vampires entered when their damage exceeded their regeneration. Victor, I slapped his cheek. Stay with me. Listen, he whispered, grabbing my shirt, pulling me down until my ear was near his lips. This island, it's not safe. I smell sulfur and oil. It's just the crashed debris, I said, trying to soothe him. No, he insisted, his voice barely audible. Old oil, machines, Elena, you must hide. His hand went limp, his chest stopped moving. Panic seized me. I checked his pulse. It was there, but faint, so slow it beat once every minute. He was in stasis. He wouldn't die, but he couldn't protect me anymore. Now I was the guardian. I looked at his ruined back. I couldn't move the metal, but I could clean it. I ripped the bottom of my velvet dress, the beautiful, expensive war paint I had bought yesterday, and soaked it in a small puddle of fresh water that had gathered on a stalagmite. I cleaned the black blood from his skin. I covered him with palm fronds I gathered from near the entrance, creating a camouflage bed. I sat there for hours, watching the entrance, holding a jagged rock I had found. My stomach twisted, thirst. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of my biological needs was crashing down. I hadn't had water since the plane. The seawater I swallowed was making it worse. I looked at Victor. He was safe for now. The sun was high. He wouldn't wake up until nightfall, if at all. I'll be right back, I whispered to his unconscious form. I'm just going to find water. I stepped out of the cave, sticking to the shadows of the jungle canopy. The island was stiflingly hot. Insects buzzed in the thick, humid air. It looked like a paradise, bright flowers, towering trees, white sand. But something was wrong. It was too quiet. There were no birds singing, no monkeys chattering, just the wind and the ocean. I walked deeper into the tree line, following the slope of the land, looking for a stream. My designer heels sank into the soft earth, so I kicked them off. I walked barefoot, the expensive pedicure now covered in mud. I found a small creek about 10 minutes inland. I fell to my knees and drank, scooping the water with my hands. It was cool and sweet. I washed my face. I felt a momentary sense of relief. We were alive. We had water. We could survive this. Then I saw it. On the mud bank across the stream, a footprint. My heart stopped. It wasn't a bare footprint. It wasn't a shoe print. It was a boot print. Heavy, military-grade tread, deep in the mud, and it was fresh. The water was still seeping into the impression. I froze. Victor said this island was uncharted. He said it was wild. But wild islands don't have people wearing tactical combat boots. I looked up, scanning the jungle. About 50 yards away, almost perfectly camouflaged by vines, was a structure. It wasn't a hut. It was a concrete bunker, half buried in the earth. It looked old, weathered, covered in moss. But above the rusty metal door, there was a symbol painted in faded yellow. A circle with a lightning bolt through it, and the letters Project Chimera, Site B. My blood ran cold. Site B Chimera. I remembered the files on the tablet, the Order of the Golden Mask, the experiments. We hadn't crashed on a random island. We had crashed on one of their disposal sites, a place where they dumped the things that went wrong. Snap. A twig broke behind me. It wasn't the wind. I spun around, clutching my jagged rock. Standing in the shadows of a fern tree, watching me with unblinking, yellow eyes, was something that shouldn't exist. It looked like a wolf, but it stood on two legs. Its fur was patchy, revealing scarred, gray skin underneath. Metal implants protruded from its spine. Tubes ran from its neck into a backpack device strapped to its torso. It huffed, a sound like a steam engine releasing pressure. It bared its teeth, steel fangs that dripped saliva. It wasn't an animal, it was a weapon. And it had just found breakfast. Run. The command wasn't a thought, it was a biological imperative. The creature, the chimera, lunged. Its metal claws tore through the fern where I had been standing a microsecond before. The sound was deafening, a mix of a wolf's snarl and the hydraulic hiss of heavy machinery. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I spun on my bare heels and bolted. My first instinct, the one screaming in the lizard part of my brain, was to run back to the cave, back to Victor. He was the predator. He was the monster who ate other monsters. He was safety. I pivoted, my feet slipping in the mud, aiming for the shoreline. Snap! The sound of a tree branch snapping behind me like a gunshot made me falter. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The beast was fast, terrifyingly fast. It was tearing through the underbrush on all fours, its metal spine gleaming in the dappled sunlight. If I led it to the cave... Victor was comatose. He was bleeding out. He had a piece of a plane hull stuck in his back. He couldn't fight this thing. If I brought this nightmare to his doorstep, I would be serving him up as a helpless meal. I skidded to a halt, grabbing a vine to stop my momentum. "Hey!" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. I picked up a rock and hurled it at the creature. It bounced harmlessly off the metal plating on its skull. "Over here! You ugly son of a bitch!" The chimera stopped. It tilted its head, the servos in its neck whirring. Its yellow eyes locked onto me. It huffed, steam venting from the tubes in its back. It had forgotten the scent of the blood in the cave. It wanted the noisy, moving prey. "That's right," I panted, backing away toward the dense heart of the island. "Come get me." I turned and ran, away from the beach, away from Victor, into the unknown hell of Project Chimera. The jungle was not my friend. Vines whipped my face, leaving stinging welts. Thorns tore at my ruined velvet dress, shredding the fabric until it hung in rags around my thighs. My bare feet bled, cut by sharp rocks and roots, but I couldn't feel the pain. Adrenaline was a powerful drug. Behind me, the jungle crashed. The chimera wasn't bothering to dodge trees. It was smashing through them. The ground shook with every heavy, metallic step it took. Thump thump, hiss, thump thump, hiss. It was toying with me. It knew I was slower. It was hurting me. I scrambled up a muddy embankment, my fingernails digging into the dirt. My lungs were burning like they were filled with acid. I reached the top and pushed through a wall of thick, broad leaves. Suddenly, the ground vanished. There was no warning. 1 second I was running on solid earth. The next I was falling through a camouflage net of rotting vegetation. I didn't scream. The air was knocked out of me before I could make a sound. I fell about 10 feet. I didn't land on dirt. I didn't land on rock. I landed on something crunchy and loose. Crack, snap, crunch. I rolled, gasping for air, dust filling my mouth. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of the ocean or the jungle. It was the smell of old, dry death. I pushed myself up, coughing. The light from the hole above filtered down in a single, dusty beam. I looked down at what I was sitting on. A skull. A human skull, yellowed with age, staring back at me with empty sockets. I scrambled back, my hands sinking into the pile, rib cages, femurs, hip bones, thousands of them. This wasn't a trap. It was a mass grave. I was sitting in a pit filled with the skeletons of the people who hadn't survived Project Chimera. Some of the bones were fused with rusted metal failed experiments. Some wore tattered rags of orange jumpsuits. "Oh God," I whimpered, covering my mouth. Above me, at the lip of the pit, the jungle went silent. Then, a shadow blocked the light. The chimera peered down. It sniffed the air. It let out a low, vibrating growl that echoed off the walls of the grave. It paced around the edge, looking for a way down. I was trapped. I was a rat in a bucket. I frantically scanned the pile of bones. I needed a weapon. Anything. A rock. A stick. My hand brushed against something cold and hard lodged in a ribcage near my knee. I pulled. It was stuck. "Come on," I gritted out, yanking with both hands. It came free with a shower of bone dust. It was a machete. The blade was pitted with rust, the handle wrapped in rotting leather, but it was heavy. It was sharp enough. I gripped it, my knuckles white. Suddenly, a searing heat exploded in my chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't my heart. It was the bond. It felt like a hook yanking behind my navel. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me. But it wasn't my rage. It was Victor's. In the cave, a mile away. The darkness was absolute. Victor Blackwood floated in the void of torpor. It was a peaceful, silent place. The pain of the shrapnel was distant, a dull throb. His body was shutting down, prioritizing repair over consciousness. "Sleep," the darkness whispered. "Sleep and heal." Then, a scream echoed in the void. Not a sound, but a feeling, a spike of terror, a pulse of adrenaline. Elena. The connection he had forged, the blood oath, vibrated violently. He felt her fear. He felt the fall. He felt the smell of dry bones and the proximity of a predator. The peace of the void shattered. His eyes snapped open. There was no gradual waking up, no grogginess. There was only instant, violent consciousness. The pain in his back roared to life, blinding and white-hot. The metal shard grated against his scapula. His body was weak, starved of blood, burning with fever. But none of that mattered. "She is in danger." "Elena!" He tried to stand and fell immediately, crashing into the limestone wall. His legs wouldn't support him. The sun was still up outside, though the cave offered shade. He snarled, a sound of pure frustration. He dug his claws into the stone floor, dragging himself forward. He needed fuel. He needed strength. He looked at his own arm. The veins were prominent, blue against his pale skin. He didn't hesitate. He bit his own wrist, tearing the flesh. He didn't drink. He couldn't drink his own blood for sustenance, but the pain, the sharp shock of it, focused his mind. It forced the adrenaline to spike. "Move," he commanded his broken body. "Move or she dies." He forced himself up. The world tilted and spun. He staggered to the mouth of the cave. The sunlight at the entrance was a deadly curtain. He couldn't go out there. Not yet. But the jungle canopy, it was thick. If he moved fast, if he stuck to the deepest shadows. He looked at the jungle. He could smell her scent. It was mixed with the stench of the grave and the metallic odor of the beast. Victor Blackwood stepped into the filtered light. His skin began to smoke instantly. He didn't stop, he ran. Back in the pit! The chimera stopped pacing. It had found a slope, a section of the wall that had collapsed. It slid down, a landslide of dirt and rocks announcing its arrival. It landed on the bed of bones 10 feet away from me. Up close, it was hideous. The fur was matted with oil. One of its eyes was a red camera lens. Zooming in and out, its jaw was reinforced with steel plates. It stood on its hind legs, towering over me. It was 7 feet of nightmare fuel. I stood my ground, holding the rusted machete with both hands. I was shaking, but I wasn't crying. I was done crying. "Come on," I screamed at it. "You want me? I'm right here." The chimera roared and charged. It didn't have technique. It had weight and speed. I dove to the right, crashing into a pile of skulls. The beast swiped where my head had been a second ago. Its claws shredded the air. I swung the machete blindly. Clang! The blade hit the metal plating on its arm. The vibration jarred my shoulder, nearly making me drop the weapon. It didn't even cut the skin. The beast backhanded me. It felt like being hit by a truck. I flew backward, slamming into the dirt wall of the pit. My vision went white. The machete flew out of my hand. I tasted blood. I slid down, gasping, unable to breathe. My ribs, I think I broke a rib. The chimera loomed over me. It didn't rush this time. It savored the moment. It pinned me with one heavy, metal-clawed foot, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move. I looked up into its organic yellow eye and its red mechanical lens. It opened its jaws, saliva dripped onto my face. This is it, I thought. I'm sorry, Victor, I tried. I closed my eyes, waiting for the bite. A shadow fell over the pit. And then a sound. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a shout. It was a roar. A roar so primal, so filled with ancient, supernatural fury that the bones in the pit seemed to vibrate. "Get away from her!" I opened my eyes. A dark blur dropped from the sky. Victor. He didn't land. He crashed into the chimera like a meteor. The impact was seismic. The chimera, which outweighed him by at least 200 pounds, was knocked flying across the pit. It slammed into the opposite wall, burying itself in a landslide of dirt and skeletons. Victor stood between me and the monster. He looked terrible. His shirt was gone. His skin was burned red and blistering from his run through the sun-dappled jungle. The metal shard was still sticking out of his back, oozing black blood. He was swaying on his feet. But his eyes were burning with a garnet fire so intense they looked like stars. The chimera shook itself off, extracting itself from the dirt. It looked at this new challenger. It assessed the threat. It growled, thinking it had the advantage against this wounded man. Victor laughed. It was a wet, breathless, terrifying laugh. "You think I am weak?" Victor rasped, extending his hands, his fingernails elongated into razor-sharp obsidian talons. "I am the thing that nightmares are afraid of." The chimera charged. Victor didn't dodge. He caught the beast's metal wrists in midair. The force of the collision created a shockwave. Victor's feet dug trenches into the ground, sliding back inches. But he held. He looked the cyborg wolf in the eye. "Bad dog," Victor snarled. With a sickening crunch, he twisted. It was over in seconds. Victor didn't fight the chimera. He dismantled it. With a sickening crunch. He twisted the beast's metal-plated wrist until the steel snapped like a dry twig. The creature howled distorted, electronic screech that made my teeth ache. But Victor didn't give it time to recover. He stepped inside its guard, ignoring the claws that raked across his chest. He grabbed the hydraulic tubes connecting the beast's head to the backpack generator. "Sit," Victor roared. He ripped the tubes out. Steam and black oil sprayed into the air, mixing with the creature's organic blood. The chimera convulsed, its yellow eyes flickering as its power source was severed. It flailed, trying to bite him. But Victor was a blur of violence. He grabbed the creature's jaw with one hand and the back of its metal skull with the other. He didn't hesitate. He pulled. With a wet, tearing sound that I will never forget, Victor ripped the cybernetic implant straight off the wolf's spine. The beast collapsed instantly, a heap of fur and scrap metal. It twitched once, then went still. Silence returned to the pit of bones. Victor stood over the carcass, his chest heaving. He looked terrifying, covered in oil, blood, and bone dust, his eyes burning with that dying garnet light. "Victor!" I scrambled up from the pile of skeletons, ignoring the pain in my ribs. He turned to look at me. He tried to smile. "I told you. Bad dog." Then, his eyes rolled back. The red light vanished. He crumpled. "No!" I lunged forward, catching him before his head hit the rocks. He was dead weight. And he was burning up. His skin was blistering, steam rising from his shoulders where the scattered sunlight from the pit opening touched him. The adrenaline burst that had woken him was gone, leaving him more broken than before. "We have to move," I grunted, grabbing him under his arms. "The sun is moving. This whole pit will be a frying pan in 10 minutes. I dragged him. God, he was heavy. I dug my heels into the loose dirt, pulling him inch by inch toward the deepest shadow of the pit, an overhang where the jungle floor had not yet collapsed. I propped him up against the cool dirt wall. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. The metal shard in his back had shifted during the fight, causing fresh bleeding. "Stay here," I whispered, brushing the hair from his sweaty forehead. "I need to find a way out." I looked up at the hole we had fallen through. It was too high. The walls were too steep. We were trapped. Unless... I looked at the dead chimera. It was a guard dog. You don't put a guard dog in a pit unless it's guarding something. I walked over to the carcass. The smell of ozone and wet dog was overpowering. I suppressed a gag and knelt beside it. "Sorry, buddy," I muttered, reaching into the torn mess of its tactical vest. I searched the pockets. Nothing. I checked the metallic collar fused to its neck. There. Embedded in a slot on the side of the collar was a plastic rectangle. I used my fingernails to pry it loose. It was a key card, white plastic, stained with oil. On it was a simple logo, a golden DNA helix, and the words, "Access Level 4, Underground Transit." "Bingo," I breathed. I stood up and scanned the walls of the pit. Now that I knew what to look for, I saw it. Behind a curtain of thick, dead vines in the darkest corner of the pit, there was a straight line. Nature doesn't make straight lines. I ran over and tore the vines away. Behind them was a steel door, heavy, blast-proof, no handle, just a small dusty card reader glowing with a faint red light. I looked back at Victor. The sun was creeping closer to his boots. "Please work," I prayed. I swiped the card. Beep! The light turned green. Hiss clank. Hydraulic locks disengaged with a groan of disuse. The heavy steel door slid open slowly, revealing a dark, concrete tunnel that sloped downward. A gust of cold, sterile air rushed out, smelling of chemicals and electricity. It wasn't a cave, it was an entrance. I didn't hesitate. I ran back to Victor, grabbing him again. "Come on, Sleeping Beauty," I grunted, dragging him toward the open door. "We're upgrading from the graveyard to the dungeon." I pulled him across the threshold just as the sun hit the spot where he had been lying. As soon as we were inside, I hit the button on the wall. The steel door slid shut, sealing us in darkness. But it wasn't pitch black. Emergency strip lights flickered on overhead, casting a sickly blue glow down the long concrete corridor. We were out of the sun. But looking down that long, sterile hallway that led deep into the heart of the island, I realized we might have just walked into the belly of the beast. The silence of the underground tunnel was heavier than the ocean. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the dragging of Victor's boots against the concrete. I was running on fumes. My broken ribs screamed with every step. A hot poker shoved into my side, but I couldn't stop. We passed glass observation windows. I tried not to look, but I saw them. Empty cages, restraint chairs with leather straps chewed through, dried brown stains on the walls that looked suspiciously like handprints. Just keep moving, I whispered to myself, adjusting Victor's arm over my shoulder. He was getting colder. His skin had taken on a terrifying gray color, like ash. The immortality was fading. The corpse was returning. Medical. Need medical. I panted, scanning the doors. Finally, about 50 yards down, I saw it. A white door with a red cross and the symbol of the golden DNA helix. Infirmary, Surgical Unit Yo 4. I swiped the keycard. The door hissed open. It wasn't a hospital room. It was a butcher shop disguised as a clinic. There was a steel operating table in the center, equipped with heavy iron shackles. The cabinets were stocked not just with medicine, but with tranquilizer guns and electric shock batons. I dragged Victor to the table and heaved him onto it. He groaned, a weak, gurgling sound. I ripped the remains of his shirt off his back. I gagged. The wound was necrotic. The jagged piece of aluminum was buried deep near his spine, and the flesh around it was black and oozing. It wasn't healing. It was rotting. Okay, Elena, I said, my hands shaking uncontrollably. You watched Grey's Anatomy. You can do this. I frantically searched the cabinets. I found a bottle of surgical alcohol, a pair of heavy forceps, and a roll of gauze. No anesthesia. Vampires probably didn't need it, or the people running this place didn't care. I poured the alcohol over the wound. Victor's body arched off the table, a hiss escaping his clenched teeth. His eyes flew open, but they were white, blind. I'm sorry, I sobbed, grabbing the forceps. I have to get it out. I gripped the protruding metal. It was wedged into the bone. 1, 2, 3. I pulled. The sound was the worst part, metal scraping against bone, wet suction. With a final, sickening squelch, the shard came free. Black blood thick like tar gushed out, spilling onto the steel table. Got it. I dropped the metal into a tray. Victor, it's out. You can heal now. I pressed the gauze against the hole in his back, waiting for the supernatural knitting of flesh, waiting for the steam that signaled regeneration. Nothing happened. The wound stayed open. The blood kept flowing, slower now, sluggish. I checked his pulse. It was a flutter, a dying bird. Victor. I patted his cheek. He was freezing. Come on, heal. Empty, he whispered, his lips barely moving. Reserve. Empty. He was starving. He had burned too much energy fighting the chimera and shielding me. He didn't have the fuel to repair the damage. He was going to die. Truly die. I looked at the cabinets. Bags of saline. No blood bags. This place had been abandoned for years. I looked at my own arms. I'm here, I said, a dangerous clarity washing over me. I'm the reserve. I couldn't just let him bite me. He was too weak to latch on. And if he went into a frenzy, he might drain me dry before he realized it. I needed control. I found a transfusion kit in a drawer, tubing, needles. I didn't have time to find a stand. I sat on the stool next to the table. I tied the tourniquet around my left arm. I slapped the vein until it popped up, blue and inviting. I shoved the needle in. I winced, taping it down. Then, I took the other end of the tube, I found the vein in Victor's arm, the one that was currently collapsed and flat. I inserted the needle. Gravity took over. I watched the red line of my life force travel down the clear tube. It hit his vein. 1 second, 2 seconds. Victor gasped. It was a sharp intake of breath, like a drowning man breaking the surface. Color flushed instantly into his arm, chasing away the gray ash. But I felt it too. Cold. It started in my fingertips and rushed to my core. The room started to spin. I was already dehydrated, exhausted, and injured. Giving blood now was suicide. But I didn't pull the needle out. I watched him. The wound on his back began to steam. The black flesh turned pink. The skin began to knit together, closing over the hole. "That's it," I whispered, resting my head on the metal edge of the table. "Take it. Take it all." As my blood pumped into him, the room began to change. Not physically, but electronically. A console on the far wall, a massive bank of monitors that I thought was dead, suddenly flickered to life. Beep! Blue text scrolled across the black screens. Biometric scan detected. Analyzing blood sample. Match found. Subject E001 Elena. Source direct lineage. I lifted my head, my vision blurry. "What?" A synthesized voice echoed through the sterile room. "Welcome back, Project Janus." The main screen flared bright white. A video file began to play. It was a recording. The timestamp was 23 years ago. A man sat at a desk in this very room. He was wearing a white lab coat with the golden DNA helix embroidered on the pocket. He looked young, handsome, and ambitious. He held a glass of champagne. It was my father, Mario Rossi. But he wasn't the sad, broken gambler. He looked like a god playing with ants. "Log entry 1, my father said to the camera. Smiling. "The splicing was a success. We have successfully combined the genetic markers of the ancients with a human embryo." I froze. The cold in my body was no longer from the blood loss. "The subject, Elena, has been born today," my father continued, taking a sip of champagne. "She looks human, cries like a human, but her blood, oh, her blood is a masterpiece." He leaned into the camera, his eyes gleaming with madness. "We created her for one purpose. The Blackwood heir is too powerful. He resists the sun. He resists control. We need a leash. And Elena, she is the bait." I tried to reach for the needle to pull it out, but my hand was too heavy. I was paralyzed by the horror. "Her blood is not just food," Father explained, tapping the glass. "It is a drug, a synthetic ambrosia. Once a vampire tastes it, they become addicted, biologically enslaved. They will protect the source with their lives, but they will also become dependent on it. It weakens their will while boosting their physical strength." He laughed, a cruel, calculated laugh. "I will raise her in poverty. I will break her spirit. So when the time comes to sell her to the Blackwood estate, she will be a docile little cow, ready for the slaughter, and through her, we will control the most powerful monster on Earth." The video cut to static for a second, then a new text appeared. "Current status bond activated. Warning, subject Elena is compromised. Initiating recovery protocol." Sirens began to wail in the hallway. Red lights started flashing. I looked at Victor. He was awake. He was lying on the table, his head turned toward the screen. He had seen it. He had heard every word. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me. His eyes were fully regenerated, garnet red, but there was no love in them, no warmth. There was only horror. He ripped the needle out of his arm. Blood sprayed onto the floor. He sat up, sliding off the table, backing away from me as if I were the monster. "Victor," I whispered, my voice slurring. It's a lie." "Is it?" he asked. his voice shaking. He looked at his hands, which were trembling. I felt it. Elena, the addiction, the pull. I thought it was love. I thought it was fate. He looked at me with a mixture of betrayal and self-loathing. It was just chemistry, he spat out. You were designed to enslave me. No. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. I fell to the floor, darkness encroaching on the edges of my vision. The alarm, Victor said, looking at the flashing red lights. They know you are here. Your father. He built this trap. He looked at the door. Then he looked at me, lying helpless on the floor. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to leave me. I thought he was going to leave the weapon behind to be reclaimed by its creators. But then, the door to the infirmary hissed open. 4 men in tactical gear stood there. They weren't wearing masks. They were wearing the uniform of Project Janus. They raised their tranquilizer rifles. Secure the specimen, one shouted. Victor roared. It wasn't the roar of a protector. It was the roar of a junkie whose supply was being threatened. He launched himself at them. The sound of violence was wet and rhythmic. I lay paralyzed on the cold infirmary floor, my vision tunneling to a pinprick. I watched Victor move. He wasn't the man who had held me on the beach. He wasn't the husband who had danced with me in the ballroom. He was a hurricane of slaughter. The 4 tactical soldiers didn't stand a chance. Victor moved faster than their eyes could track. He didn't use weapons. He used his hands. Snap, a neck broken, crunch, a rib cage shattered. He tore through them with a dispassionate, mechanical efficiency. There was no glory in it, no rage, just the cold disposal of obstacles. When the last body hit the floor, Victor stood amidst the carnage. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his shirt gone, revealing the freshly healed scar on his back where I had saved his life. He turned slowly, his garnet eyes locked onto mine. Victor, I whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. My fingers were stained with my own blood from the IV tube he had ripped out. Help me! He stared at my hand. Then he looked at the needle lying on the floor, the needle that had connected us. A look of pure revulsion twisted his handsome face. It wasn't disgust at the blood. It was disgust at himself. At his own weakness. At the fact that he wanted to crawl over to me and lick the blood from my fingers. I will not be a slave, Victor snarled, his voice cracking with emotion. Not to your father, and not to you. I didn't know, I sobbed, tears leaking from my eyes. I love you. You were programmed to say that, he spat back, and I was programmed to believe it. He stepped over me. He literally stepped over my body as if I were a piece of furniture. He walked to the door, stepping on the hand I had reached out to him. He didn't look back. He walked out into the flashing red lights of the hallway, disappearing into the darkness of the facility. Victor, I screamed, but it came out as a broken wheeze. He left me. He actually left me. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. I was alone, bleeding, dying on the floor of my father's nightmare factory. Fascinating. A new voice cut through the hum of the ventilation system. I tried to turn my head. A pair of pristine, white Italian loafers stepped into my field of vision. I looked up. Standing over me was a man in a white lab coat. He was tall, thin, with silver wire-rimmed glasses and hair the color of steel. He held a tablet in one hand and a handkerchief in the other. He looked at the dead soldiers with mild annoyance, then at me with clinical curiosity. Subject E01, he said, tapping his screen. Heart rate critical. Blood volume at 60%. Emotional distress. Off the charts. He crouched down, careful not to get blood on his expensive trousers. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a collector finding a rare butterfly. I am Dr. Aris. He introduced himself softly. I worked with your father on the Janus project. In fact, I'm the one who designed your nutritional plan when you were a baby. Go to hell, I whispered. I'm afraid we're already there, my dear. Aris chuckled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. Victor broke you. Good. Broken things are so much easier to recalibrate. He thinks you are a trap. He has no idea. He plunged the syringe into my neck. Sleep now, Elena. We have a lot of harvesting to do. Blackness took me. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was cold. I woke up drowning. My eyes flew open, but everything was distorted, blurry, green. I tried to scream, but liquid rushed into my mouth. It tasted metallic, oxygenated. I choked, thrashing, but my limbs were heavy. I was floating. I looked down. I was naked, suspended in a glass cylinder filled with a translucent green fluid. Tubes, dozens of them, were connected to my body. They were inserted into my arms, my legs, my neck. I was in a tank, a human aquarium. Through the thick glass, I saw the laboratory. It was massive. Walls of servers blinked in the dark, and rows of other tanks. Empty tanks, waiting. Dr. Eris was standing at a console in front of my tank, typing furiously. He looked up and saw me awake. He pressed a button on a microphone. Calm down, Elena. His voice echoed inside the tank, vibrating through the fluid. You are in the nurturing chamber. The fluid is keeping you alive. It's also stimulating your bone marrow. I banged on the glass. Let me out. Look at the monitors, Eris commanded, pointing a laser pointer at a screen on the wall. I looked. It showed a diagram of my body. Red lines were flowing out of me into collection canisters. We are entering phase 2, Eris explained, his voice filled with pride. Since Victor has rejected the supply, we need to extract it and process it into a serum. Ambrosia. We will bottle it. We will sell it to the highest bidder in the order. Imagine. Elena. Vampires paying billions for a single vial of your essence. You are going to make us very, very rich. He walked over to the glass and placed his hand against it, right where my face was. Your father wanted to control Victor, Eris whispered. I have a bigger vision. I don't want to control one monster. I want to control the entire species. And you are the golden goose. I watched the red liquid pulsing through the clear tubes leaving my body. My blood, my life, being drained away to be sold as a drug. Despair crashed over me. Victor was gone. My father was a monster. I was a battery. I stopped fighting. I let my body drift in the suspension fluid. I closed my eyes, wishing for the end. Die, I told my heart. Just stop beating. Don't give them another drop. But my heart didn't stop. It beat harder. Thump, 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 thump. And then, deep in the darkness of my own mind, I heard it. A whisper, not from my father, not from Victor. From the blood itself? They think they designed us. The voice was ancient, angry, female. They spliced us with the ancients. They didn't create a sheep. Elena? They cloned a wolf. My eyes snapped open inside the tank. I looked at the tubes again. Aris said my blood was an addictive drug. Ambrosia, something that made vampires feel euphoria and strength. But drugs can be altered. Chemistry can be changed. If I was the factory, then I controlled the formula. I focused, not on the fear, not on the pain, but on the rage. The pure white-hot hatred for every man who had ever used me, sold me, or abandoned me. I imagined that rage flowing into my veins. I imagined it turning the red blood into black poison. I imagined every cell in my body sharpening into a microscopic knife. Change. I commanded my own biology. Don't be sweet. Be bitter. Be acid. Be death. Outside the tank, an alarm beeped. Dr. Eris frowned. He looked at the console. What is this? He muttered, tapping the screen. pH balance is dropping, adrenaline levels spiking, cortisol, toxicity. He looked up at the tank. Inside the green fluid, I smiled. It was a terrifying smile, magnified by the glass. The blood flowing through the clear tubes outside the tank began to change color. It darkened. It wasn't the bright, healthy crimson of life anymore. It was turning a deep, venomous purple. "System alert," the computer voice announced. "Contamination detected. Sample is becoming unstable." Eris panicked. He started hitting buttons. "Stop, stabilize the subject. She's sabotaging the harvest." He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How are you doing that? You are just a vessel." I pressed my hand against the glass. "I am not a vessel," I thought, projecting the words with all the force of my awakened mind. "I am the plague." The fluid in the tank began to bubble. The pressure gauge on the side of the cylinder climbed into the red zone. Crack! A spiderweb fracture appeared on the glass, right under my palm. Eris stumbled back, terrified. "Impossible! The glass is bulletproof." I closed my fist. Shatter. The glass didn't just break, it exploded. Thousands of shards rained down on the laboratory floor like diamond hail. The green suspension fluid flooded the room, washing over Dr. Eris's expensive Italian loafers. I stepped out of the broken cylinder. I was wet, naked, and shivering, but I didn't feel cold. I felt nuclear. My veins were burning, not with pain, but with power. I could feel every red blood cell in my body vibrating, rewriting its own code. The rage I felt wasn't an emotion anymore. It was a chemical reaction. Dr. Eris scrambled backward, slipping in the slime, clutching his tablet like a shield. "Stay back!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Security containment breach in Sector 4. "No one is coming. Doctor," I said. My voice sounded different, deeper, resonant, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You locked the doors to keep Victor out. Now you're locked in with me." I walked toward him. I didn't run. I didn't need to. The broken glass under my bare feet didn't cut me. Or maybe it did, and I just healed too fast to notice. I reached a metal cart and grabbed a white lab coat. I shrugged it on, buttoning it calmly. It was stained with the green fluid, but it felt like armor. Aris backed into a corner, knocking over a tray of surgical instruments. He grabbed a scalpel, holding it out with a shaking hand. "Don't come closer," he warned, sweat pouring down his pale face. I have the override codes. I can shock you the implant in your neck." I touched the back of my neck. I felt the small bump of the chip they had put in me at birth. I smiled. "You mean this?" I focused. I imagined my blood turning into acid around the foreign object. I imagined the tissue rejecting it violently. "Push!" With a wet pop, the small microchip burst out of my skin, landing on the floor with a clatter. A trickle of dark, purple blood followed it. It hissed when it touched the tile, melting the linoleum. Aris stared at the smoking floor. The scalpel fell from his hand. "My God," he whispered, his eyes wide with scientific horror. You've metabolized the control mechanism. You've become toxic." "You wanted a sample, didn't you, Doctor?" I stepped into his personal space. I towered over him. "You wanted to bottle my essence, to sell it." I grabbed him by the throat. I didn't squeeze. I just held him there, pinning him against the cold steel wall. I raised my other hand, the one still dripping with the purple, venomous blood from my neck. "Open wide," I whispered. "No, please," Eris gagged, trying to turn his head away. "It's just science. Eris," I mocked him, using his own cold logic. "Hypothesis. If my blood is ambrosia for vampires, what is it for humans? Let's test it." I smeared my blood-stained hand across his mouth. He screamed, but the liquid seeped in. He swallowed reflexively. The reaction was instantaneous. Aris convulsed. He clawed at his throat. His face turned a violent shade of red, then purple. "It burns," he choked out. falling to his knees as I let him go. It, it's like fire. It's not fire, I said, watching him writhe on the floor with detached curiosity. It's concentrated adrenaline and hatred. My blood is attacking your cells. It's rewriting you, just like you tried to rewrite me. Tell me, doctor, does it taste like money? Aris coughed up bile. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. He wasn't seeing a girl anymore. He was seeing a monster he had accidentally created. The antidote, he wheezed. Please! There is no antidote for consequence, I said coldly. I crouched down so our faces were level. But I can stop the dosage, if you tell me where he is. Who? Janus, I hissed. My father, the gatekeeper. Where is he hiding on this island? Iris hesitated. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room. He was terrified of betraying the order. I grabbed his hand, my fingernails now sharp and hard as glass dug into his palm. I let a single drop of my toxic blood fall into the scratch. Aris screamed as his veins began to turn black, the poison spreading up his arm. The observatory, he shrieked. He's in the apex suite, top of the mountain. He's watching everything. The observatory, I repeated. Standing up. Fitting. He likes to look down on his rats. I looked at Aris. He was curled in a fetal position, clutching his blackened arm. He wouldn't die. Not yet. But he would wish he had. Thank you for your contribution to science, I said, stepping over him. I walked toward the main exit. The heavy blast doors were sealed. I looked at the electronic keypad. I didn't have a code. I didn't need one. I placed my hand on the metal panel. I let the acid in my sweat glands seep out. Sizzle. Smoke rose from the keypad. The circuitry inside melted. The locking mechanism short-circuited. With a groan of dying electronics, the heavy doors began to slide open. The hallway outside was swarming. The moment the doors opened, I expected gunfire. I expected a wall of bullets. But it was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped out into the corridor. The red emergency lights were still flashing, casting long, dancing shadows. Then I saw them. Bodies. Dozens of them. Guards in tactical gear. Scientists in lab coats. They were strewn across the floor like discarded toys. Their necks were snapped. Their weapons were bent in half. And standing in the middle of the carnage, held by two massive hulking figures in exoskeleton armor heavy troopers, was Victor. He was on his knees. He was bound in heavy chains that glowed with UV light, the only thing that could weaken him. His skin was smoking where the chains touched him. He looked beaten, bruised, exhausted. But he was still alive. The heavy troopers had their weapons, massive plasma cannons, pointed at his head. Target secured, one trooper barked into his radio. We have the vampire. Prepare for transport to the apex. Wait, the other trooper said, pointing at me. Look. Victor lifted his head. He looked terrible. His eyes were dull, his face gaunt. He looked like a man who had lost everything. When he saw me standing there in the doorway, wearing a blood-stained lab coat, barefoot amidst the glass, his expression crumbled. He expected to see a corpse or a victim crying in the corner. He didn't expect to see the Queen of the Damned. I stood tall. My skin was glowing faintly with a pearlescent sheen, a side effect of the toxicity. My eyes, usually brown, were flecked with violet. The trooper pointed his cannon at me. Subject E001, get on the ground, hands behind your head. I didn't move. I looked at Victor. You came back, I said softly. I didn't come back for you. Victor rasped, his voice hoarse, trying to maintain his pride even in chains. I came back to kill Eris. They caught me. Liar, I said. I walked forward. Freeze! The trooper charged his weapon. The high-pitched whine of the plasma coil filled the air. I ignored him. I looked only at Victor. You left me to die, I said, stopping 10 feet away from them. You walked out that door. You are a trap, Victor said, looking away, shame burning in his cheeks. Your blood, it controls me. My blood, I corrected him, is mine, and I decide who it controls and who it kills. I turned my head slowly to look at the trooper aiming at me. Put the gun down, I ordered. Fire, the trooper shouted. He pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. The trooper looked at his weapon in confusion. Malfunction weapon jammed. It's not jammed, I said, walking closer. The air in here, it's full of pheromones. My pheromones, highly corrosive to copper wiring. It was a bluff, mostly, but the fear in his eyes made it real. I lunged. I wasn't a fighter like Victor. I didn't have centuries of combat experience. But I had something else. I had surprise, and I had a touch that burned. I grabbed the trooper's armored wrist. My acid blood ate through the seal of his suit in seconds. He screamed as the toxin touched his skin. He dropped the cannon. The second trooper swung his fist at me. Wham! A blur of black motion intercepted the blow. Victor! Even in chains, even burning from the UV light, he had moved. He had thrown his body between me and the fist. He took the blow to his ribs with a sickening crack. He fell back, coughing blood. Don't, Victor groaned, looking up at me from the floor. Don't let them take you. I looked at him. He had protected me. Again. Despite his anger. Despite his belief that I was a trap. Instinct or love had overridden his pride. The two troopers regrouped, drawing shock batons. I stepped in front of Victor. You're right, Victor, I said, my voice vibrating with power. I was designed to be a weapon. I raised both hands. I bit my own tongue, hard, my mouth filled with the bitter, purple taste of power. I spat. A spray of toxic mist hit the troopers in the faceplates of their helmets. The polycarbonate sizzled and melted instantly. They screamed, clawing at their faces, blinding themselves. They collapsed, writhing in agony. Silence returned to the hallway. I turned to Victor. He was staring at me, not with fear anymore, but with awe, and a terrifying kind of hunger. I knelt down beside him. I touched the UV chains binding him. My fingers burned, but the acid in my sweat began to eat away at the metal links. Hiss, snap. The chains fell away. Victor rubbed his burned wrists. He looked at the dead troopers, then at Aris whimpering in the lab, then at me. You changed, he whispered, reaching out to touch my face. He hesitated, afraid I might burn him too. I took his hand and pressed it to my cheek. It didn't burn. My toxicity was a choice now. We both changed, I said. You're not the king anymore, Victor, and I'm not the pawn. I stood up and offered him a hand. My father is waiting for us at the top of the mountain, I said, my eyes flashing violet. Are you ready to go say hello to your father-in-law? Victor took my hand. He stood up, his height towering over me again. The garnet light returned to his eyes, darker and more dangerous than before. He smiled, a sharp, feral smile. After you, my queen. The elevator ride to the top of the mountain was agonizingly smooth. It was a glass box, ascending through the clouds, playing soft, classical Mozart. Beside me, Victor stood like a statue carved from obsidian. He hadn't spoken since we left the heavy troopers melting in the hallway. His hand was gripping mine so hard I thought my knuckles would crack. But I didn't pull away. I needed the pain to know this was real. We were ascending to the observatory, the highest point on the island, the throne of the gatekeeper. Ding! The doors slid open. I expected a bunker. I expected a fortress. What I saw was a penthouse. The entire top floor was a dome of reinforced glass, offering a 360-degree view of the storm raging outside. Inside. It was warm, A fireplace crackled. A Persian rug covered the floor. In the center of the room sat a long mahogany table set for high tea. Silver platters, porcelain cups, tiered cake stands. It would have been a beautiful scene, if not for the decorations. Slumped in the expensive leather armchairs, arranged like guests at a party, were corpses. They were men in suits, members of the Order's board, perhaps or failed scientists. Their skin was blue, their eyes open and staring. They had been poisoned. And sitting at the head of the table, sipping from a delicate teacup, was my father, Mario Rossi. He looked exactly like the man in the video logs, only older. His hair was silver, his tuxedo impeccable. He didn't look like a man under siege. He looked like a host waiting for late arrivals. "You're late," he said, placing the cup down on its saucer with a gentle clink. "The scones are getting cold." "Father," I said, stepping out of the elevator. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Elena," he smiled, a warm, fatherly smile that made my skin crawl. "And Victor, you look terrible. Being undead really takes a toll on the complexion. Doesn't it?" Victor released my hand. He walked into the room, his presence filling the space with menace. "Where is the lion?" Victor asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I want the head of the order." Mario laughed. He picked up a silver napkin and dabbed his mouth. "The lion." Mario gestured to a corpse sitting to his right, a fat man with a golden mask resting on his lap. That was Senator Miller. He died about an hour ago, cyanide in the Earl Grey. I'm afraid I'm the only one left in charge. Victor, I liquidated the board. He stood up, spreading his arms. "Welcome to my retirement party." Victor lunged. He moved with supernatural speed. Closing the distance in a blink, he grabbed Mario by the throat and lifted him into the air. "Give me one reason not to rip your head off," Victor snarled, his fangs extending. Mario didn't struggle. He didn't gasp. He just pointed a finger at a large monitor on the wall. "Because," Mario wheezed, smiling, "if you kill me, you'll never know what you are." Victor froze. "What I am," Victor hissed. "I am the heir of Blackwood. I am a vampire." "Oh, Victor," Mario sighed, looking at him with pity. "You really believe the fairy tales, don't you? Ancient curses, magic, daggers, gypsy bloodlines." Mario reached into his jacket pocket. Victor flinched, tightening his grip, but Mario only pulled out a remote control. He pressed a button. The screen on the wall flared to life. It wasn't a magical ritual, it was grainy, handheld footage from 1994. A hospital room, a quarantined zone, a child no more than 5 years old strapped to a bed, screaming. The child's skin was blistering under the fluorescent lights. His veins were black. The chart at the foot of the bed read, "Subject Victor Blackwood, diagnosis unknown, viral pathogen Chimera V." Victor dropped Mario. He stared at the screen. He stared at the screaming child. He stared at himself. "You aren't a monster, Victor," Mario said, adjusting his tie and coughing. "You are a patient. Patient zero." Victor stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, the ritual, the mask. Theatricality," Mario dismissed, pouring himself more tea. 30 years ago, the Blackwood family funded a bioweapons program. They wanted a super soldier virus, something that made men stronger, faster, immune to pain. They tested it on their own son, you. Mario took a sip. But the virus mutated. It didn't just make you strong. It rewrote your DNA. It made you allergic to UV radiation. It gave you a crave for hemoglobin to replace the red blood cells the virus destroyed. It didn't make you a vampire. Victor, it made you a biological mistake. Silence descended on the room. The only sound was the storm howling outside the glass. Victor looked at his hands, the hands he thought were cursed by ancient gods. They were just sick. "Everything you believe is a lie," Mario continued, ruthlessly twisting the knife. The Order of the Golden Mask, just a board of investors managing their asset. The ritual 5 years ago, we didn't curse you. We put you into a medically induced coma because the virus was becoming unstable. We were trying to reboot your system. And me? I asked, stepping forward. My voice was trembling. Where do I fit in? Mario turned to look at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. The virus has a flaw, Mario explained. It consumes the host. Victor is dying. He has been dying for 30 years. Every time he drinks blood, he buys a few hours. But his organs are failing. He needs a cure. Mario walked over to a glass case on the wall. He opened it and took out a long, slender object wrapped in black velvet. We couldn't synthesize a cure in a test tube, Mario said softly. The biological complexity was too high. We needed a living incubator, someone with a compatible genetic structure who could filter the virus and produce an antibody. He turned to me. You, Elena, you are the incubator. He pointed the object at me. It wasn't a gun. He unwrapped the velvet. It was a knife, a surgical scalpel made of obsidian, with a handle of pure gold. The blade was razor sharp, designed for one thing only. The antibody isn't in your blood anymore, Mario said. You metabolized it. It concentrated in your heart. My hand went to my chest. I could feel my heart beating against my ribs. Thump, thump. To cure the disease, Mario said, looking at Victor, you have to consume the source, not the blood, the heart, raw, fresh. Victor looked at me. His face was pale. The horror in his eyes was absolute. Mario walked over to Victor and held out the knife. Here's the deal. Patient 0, Mario said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You are rotting from the inside out. You have maybe 24 hours before your system crashes permanently. If you die, you die. But if you cut out her heart and eat it, the virus dies. The mutation reverses. Mario smiled. You will be able to walk in the sun. You will be able to eat food. You will age. You will be human, just a normal, rich man with a long life ahead of him. Victor stared at the knife. The handle glittered in the firelight. And if I refuse? Victor asked hoarsely. Then you die in agony. Mario shrugged. And I'll just harvest her anyway. Aris might have failed. But I won't. I'll put her back in a tank, extract the antibodies piece by piece until there's nothing left but a husk. Mario leaned in close. So, what will it be? Victor, do you want to be a monster who dies, or a man who kills the woman he loves? Mario placed the obsidian knife in Victor's hand. Victor's fingers closed around the hilt. The room spun. I looked at Victor. He wasn't looking at Mario, he was looking at me. His eyes were churning with conflict. I saw the exhaustion there. 30 years of pain, 30 years of darkness, the promise of the sun, the promise of being normal. It was the one thing he had always wanted. And all he had to do was kill the bait. Victor took a step toward me. Victor, I whispered, stepping back until my heels hit the glass wall of the dome. Behind me, lightning flashed, illuminating the silhouette of the man holding the knife. He raised the blade. I'm sorry, Elena, he said, a single tear, a bloody tear rolling down his cheek. I never wanted to be a monster. The lightning flash froze the moment in time. Victor stood with his arm raised, the obsidian knife poised to strike. I pressed my back against the cold glass of the dome, my heart hammering against my ribs, the very heart that was supposed to be his salvation. I never wanted to be a monster, Victor whispered, his voice cracking with a lifetime of regret. Mario Rossi sipped his tea, a smug smile playing on his lips, waiting for the slaughter. Victor's eyes met mine. In that split second, the conflict vanished. The exhaustion vanished. The garnet light in his irises flared brighter than a supernova. He didn't lunge at me. With a roar that shook the glass walls, Victor spun on his heel. Thwack! The sound was wet and solid. The obsidian scalpel wasn't buried in my chest. It was buried to the hilt in Mario Rossi's heart. The teacup slipped from my father's fingers. Shatter. Mario looked down at his chest. He looked at the black handle protruding from his tuxedo. He blinked, confused. Then, he looked at Victor. Disappointing, Mario sighed. He didn't fall, he didn't bleed red. Instead, a thick blue fluid leaked from the wound, sizzling where it touched the fabric. Mario reached up and calmly pulled the knife out of his chest. Crunch! The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed from inside his body. He threw the bloody knife on the table. Did you really think, Mario said, standing up and unbuttoning his shirt to reveal a chest plate of gleaming chrome and synthetic mesh, that I would trust a biological heart after seeing yours fail, Victor? He tore the shirt open completely. He wasn't just a man. He was a masterpiece of bioengineering. His torso was a lattice of tubing and steel, pulsing with the same blue fluid that ran through the facility. I am the next evolution, Mario declared, his voice distorting into a metallic growl. I don't need blood, I don't need sleep, and I certainly don't need ungrateful children. He moved. He was faster than Victor, faster than the Chimera. He crossed the room in a blur and backhanded Victor. Crack! Victor, already weakened and dying, flew across the room. He smashed into the stone fireplace, crumbling the masonry. He didn't get up. He lay there, coughing up black blood, his body convulsing as the virus began its final, fatal shutdown. Victor! I screamed, running toward him. Mario intercepted me. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me back. No, no, Elena, Mario tutted, dragging me toward the balcony door. He rejected the cure. Now, he gets to watch me harvest it. I'll admit, eating a heart raw is barbaric. I prefer to extract the antibodies in a sterile lab. It will take days. He dragged me. My heels scraped the Persian rug. I looked at Victor. He was trying to crawl. He was reaching for me, his fingers scraping the stone floor, leaving bloody streaks. Run! Victor wheezed. Rage. It exploded in my chest again, but this time, it wasn't just survival, it was pure, vindictive fury. Let go of me, I hissed. I didn't struggle against Mario's grip. I grabbed his mechanical arm with both hands. Systems check, Father, I whispered. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled. I summoned the toxicity. I visualized my blood turning into the strongest corrosive acid nature could produce. I spat. A mouthful of purple. Sizzling blood hit Mario directly in his exposed chest cavity, right where the knife had made a hole in his armor. Hiss! The reaction was violent. My blood didn't just burn, it devoured. It ate through the synthetic mesh. It dissolved the blue tubes. Mario shrieked a sound of human pain mixed with electronic feedback. He dropped me, clutching his chest. Smoke billowed from his torso. What? What have you done? I'm rewriting your code, I said, standing up. I looked at the obsidian knife on the table. I grabbed it. Mario stumbled back, his movements jerky. The acid was eating his internal gyroscope. You can't kill me. I am the Order. I am God. You're just a broken toaster, I said cold. I ran at him. He tried to block, but his arm locked up, sparks flying from the elbow. I didn't aim for the heart this time. I aimed for the neck. Slash! The obsidian blade severed the synthetic cables and the organic artery in his throat. Blue fluid and red blood sprayed in a chaotic fountain, covering the glass walls. Mario gurgled. He fell to his knees. His eyes, one human, one robotic, flickered and went dark. He collapsed face forward onto his own tea party. Dead. Silence returned to the observatory. The storm outside seemed to pause, acknowledging the shift in power. I dropped the knife. My hands were shaking. I was covered in blue and red gore. Victor. I turned. He was still by the fireplace. He hadn't moved. His skin was turning a terrifying shade of gray. His chest was barely moving. I ran to him, sliding on my knees across the floor. I pulled his head into my lap. Victor, stay with me, I begged, brushing the hair from his clammy forehead. He's dead. We won. Victor opened his eyes. They were milky white, the blindness of the dying. Elena, he whispered, his voice a dry rattle. Go. The sun is coming. I looked out the glass dome. The horizon was brightening. Dawn. No, I sobbed. You can be cured, the knife, my heart. No. Victor interrupted, reaching up blindly to touch my face. I won't. Take your life. To save mine. I would rather die. As a man who loved you, than live as a monster. Without you. You are not a monster, I screamed, and you are not dying. I looked at my wrist. The cuts from the infirmary had healed. I looked at the obsidian knife. I grabbed it again. What are you doing? Victor gasped. I am making a choice, I said fiercely. I slashed my own wrist, deep, vertical. Blood welled up, dark, purple, toxic to enemies, but maybe? Drink, I commanded, pressing my wrist to his lips. It enslaves. Victor tried to turn his head away. It only enslaves if you fight it, I whispered, leaning down, my forehead touching his. Surrender to it. Victor, surrender to me. Don't be human. Be mine. Victor shuddered. The scent of the blood was overwhelming his dying senses. He couldn't resist. He opened his mouth and latched onto my wrist. He drank. It wasn't a gentle sip. It was a desperate, starving pull. I felt my life force draining away, rushing into him. The room spun, my vision grayed. Vision? Is this how it ends, I thought? Do we both die here? But then, the change happened. Victor didn't turn human. He didn't turn pink and soft. The gray skin shattered like a shell. Underneath, new skin formed pale as moonlight, hard as diamond. His muscles swelled, ripping the remains of his shirt. His eyes snapped open. They weren't white. They weren't even garnet. They were purple, the color of my blood, the color of royalty. He stopped drinking. He licked the wound on my wrist, and it sealed instantly. He sat up. He didn't look like a patient anymore. He looked like a king. He stood, pulling me up with him effortlessly. The first rays of the sun crested the horizon. The beam of light hit the glass dome and flooded the room. Victor didn't burn. He stood in the sunlight, naked from the waist up, glowing with an ethereal, terrifying beauty. The virus hadn't been cured. It had been evolved. My blood hadn't made him human. It had made him a daywalker. Elena, he said, his voice echoing with a double tone, human and monster intertwined. He looked at his hands, watching the sunlight dance on his skin. Then he looked at me. He dropped to one knee. Not in weakness, in devotion. You saved me, he whispered. You didn't make me a man. You made me a god. He took my hand and kissed the scar on my wrist. Long live the Queen, 1 month later. The boardroom of Blackwood Industries was full. 12 new members sat around the table. They were nervous. They kept glancing at the empty chair at the head of the table. The doors opened. We walked in. Victor wore a black suit, sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't wear sunglasses, even though the room was flooded with daylight. I walked beside him. I wore a white suit, a stark contrast to the darkness we represented. On my finger sat the Blackwood ring, the double-headed eagle. We didn't sit. We stood at the head of the table. Gentlemen, Victor said, his voice smooth and commanding, the Order of the Golden Mask is dissolved. Dissolved, a brave shareholder asked. But, who will lead the network? We will, I said. Placing my hands on the table, my eyes flashed violet for just a second. The shareholders flinched. They had heard the rumors. They knew what happened to Mario Rossi. They knew about the ambrosia running through our veins. We are implementing a new policy, Victor continued, placing his hand over mine. Absolute loyalty, or absolute liquidation. He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who owned the entire jungle. Any questions? Silence. Good, I said, meeting adjourned. We turned and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over New York City. The city looked small from up here. Victor wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He kissed my neck, right over the pulse. Are you happy, my love? He whispered. I looked at the reflection in the glass. Two monsters in designer suits. Two survivors who had burned the world down to build a throne on the ashes. We weren't the heroes. We weren't the good guys. But we were together, and we were unstoppable. Yes, I whispered back, leaning into his embrace. I'm starving. Victor laughed, a low, dark sound that promised chaos. Then let's eat.